Everyone, I'd like to call to order the regular Board of Trustees meeting for September 27th, 2022. Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Pro Tem
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gray.
Here.
Trustee Harvey.
Here.
Trustee Marcelli.
Here.
Trustee Murphy.
Yes.
Trustee Butler.
Here.
Trustee Aaron's arrival will be delayed.
Thank you very much. All right, next on our agenda is citizen participation. This is a chance for members of the public to speak tonight for anything that is not on tonight's agenda. If you could come to the front, state your name and address, and if possible, keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. We have 4 signed up, and we'll start off with Linda Wilson.
My name is Linda Wilson and I live at 1461 Merlette Street here in Berthoud. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to express my concerns to the trustees and the staff this evening. I started coming to these meetings on a regular basis in May of this year. The meetings have been educational, both from the standpoint of learning how the board functions and the town's new projects. It occurs to me that each of the trustees has a special passion, which in some cases is a reason for them becoming a trustee. And I applaud your perseverance in accomplishing this goal. I too have a passion, and my passion is trees. In previous trustee meetings, 2 items were acknowledged. First, many of the newly planted trees' deaths are occurring due to poor nursery stock and the lack of water. And second, municipal codes are laws which are defensible in the municipal courts. The current codes regarding tree plantings are very detailed and when followed result in successful tree growth. These codes were written using research-based information. I am proposing a solution to prevent the newly planted trees from dying. Enforcement of current codes and, in addition, before those trees are put into the ground, they must be inspected by a designated forestry department representative, and the planting procedure must also be approved. If this does not occur, the landscape contractor will receive the standard fee of $2,600 for each tree planted, which was not done following the procedure. I realize that the Forest Department has 2 staff members, so adjustments to their staffing or outsourcing to a certified personnel will be required. With the town's commitment to remain a designated Tree City USA and to continue its rich heritage of tree-lined streets, code enforcement is the viable solution to this problem.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, next on our agenda, forgive me. Leslie Tassie.
Good evening. I'm Leslie Tassie. I live at 945 North 4th Street here in Berthoud. Wonderful Berthoud. Yeah, I'm not sure if this, I hope this is, I have some questions. I have some concerns about Old Town. I live in Old Town. I ride my bike around Old Town. I walk around Old Town, and I think it's looking kind of shabby. And I was wondering, I noticed that I think especially on Mountain Avenue, the planters have, the plants died and there's nothing in them now. And I didn't know who takes care of those, but I think we should take more pride in our Main Street. Also, the Christmas decorations are I think, less than, what to say, acceptable. I think they could use a spruce up or some new ideas. That's my first question. And then I think, I just think that should be a priority. I've been in other towns, Fort Collins, Loveland, their big planters are just gorgeous and overflowing, and they put seasonal things in. Now they should have pumpkins in them and things, and ours are just bare. So anyway, that's just food for thought. The other issue is I'm wondering about the streets right in Old Town. I was riding my bike around the other day, and I noticed that Colorado, Kansas, and Michigan, south of Mountain, are newly paved. But when I go north of Mountain, along, like, for example, 6th, 7th, and Franklin, they are in deplorable shape. And I just wondered, when Old Town gets some attention that it needs with these streets, because I've hit some potholes and almost had accidents, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. So just wanted to bring that to your attention, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Administrator, for both of these, do you mind, so with our code, and we'll start out with the trees, enforcement of the current code, are we doing any kind of
We're doing all the things that Ms. Wilson described.
okay, so checking the nursery stock before they're planted, ensuring that they have irrigation and they're following code.
Yeah, and those don't always happen. Sometimes, contractors are anxious to get trees in the ground, get landscaping in, and we have to remind them that they have to follow the requirements that we adopted a couple of years ago. As we've talked about many times, the vast majority of trees that are planted currently in new subdivisions were planted before the code changes that we made a couple of years ago. The ones that are getting planted now, we just met again last week with our forestry staff and with our development inspection teams to make sure that those inspections are still happening, that the trees are being inspected before they're planted, that the inspection occurs during planting. We won't watch every single tree get put in the ground because it's just not an efficient use of time, but making sure that we're going out and randomly checking on the planting procedures, making sure that they're sufficient, all of those things. We do have contract staff that support us. They're qualified landscape architects, and then we have our forestry crews.
And we're still looking at like Hammond and stuff, kind of holding them accountable for some of the replantings.
Yeah, that's something we need to talk about. We did have our town attorney look into our ability to enforce and require replacement of trees. And she has some concerns about our ability to do that. So,
But like for the developer though, for the initial, like Hammond on the.
yeah, so as we've talked about before, when the trees get planted, there's a 1-year warranty. At the end of that 1-year warranty, our crews go out and inspect, and they tag all the trees that are either stressed and dying or have died, and those have to get replaced. And once they do, the warranty is released, and the trees are then the responsibility of the property owner to maintain. We've talked about adding an additional 6-month warranty on anything that gets planted after the 1-year warranty. But, from a builder and developer perspective, it's challenging because the homeowners are typically the ones that are taking care of the trees over the course of that 1-year period, in terms of the irrigation and whether they're weed whacking around the base of the trees. We've talked about some simple ways that we can protect some of those by changing our standards again to deal with some of the issues that continue to come up.
I was talking, we can talk about it later, but it's more along Berthoud Parkway. They're not the homeowner trees, but the ones right on.
Those are not owned. Those are owned by the Metro District. And again, I think the same thing applies to trees even within the right of way, but that are on private property and not on town-owned property.
Okay. Giving that up for enforcement.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Go ahead.
So if it's at the end of the warranty and the tree's inspected and it's in poor shape and the developer replaces it, if it's at the end of that warranty period, then is it already automatically the homeowner's responsibility and that tree could die as well?
The one they replant after the end of the warranty period?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the warranty doesn't start over.
Yeah, that's.
Warranty doesn't currently start over. That's something we've discussed in the last couple of weeks about changing our standards and requirements. At some point, the developer and the builder kind of has to be off the hook for trees that are in someone's front yard. If they're not taking care of them and they're not watering them and those kinds of things. But we do think it's not unreasonable to ask that warranty to continue for a few months after that next tree is planted.
Hey, trustee Ayers.
Just a
Yeah,
quick
go
thing.
ahead. Trustee
In
Murphy.
addition to that, I'd just be interested in circling around to this again at some point on the discussion of the enforcement and what we can legally do or not, but in good time.
Town attorney's prepared a nice legal memo, and I think there might be an opportunity to talk about some of that legal advice in terms of how far we can go with enforcement. We might need to do that in executive session so that we're clear about that. I'll talk to her about how she wants to proceed.
Yeah, I can bring it up under reports too, just to make sure you can get it on a future one or, okay. I think pretty pressing on that. I didn't know any of this was going on. And then Ms. Tassi, Sarah, Butch, I know I'm just jumping from in town to out of town, so I want to answer Ms. Tassi's questions. I know we have a published streets plan, right, on our website,
We do.
so we can know when, not Old Town.
Yeah, I don't recall off the top of my head, but our 5-year pavement maintenance plan that the board approved last year, obviously put together by our engineering team based on both the level of existing failures and the amount of money that we have to spend each year, which is roughly $1 million on asphalt maintenance. I'd have to go back and look and see the reference or the timing in that plan for the couple of streets that she mentioned. As you know, we did
I can send a link.
repavement of like 10th and Bruce and that area around Roberts Lake a couple years ago. We did the state streets this year. We did some Hillsdale, this Hillsdale subdivision over the last 3 or 4 years. But again, yeah, I know that the downtown streets are on the list, but I don't know off the top of my head what year that is.
Okay, and Ms. Tassi, I can email you the link to the website. And I don't want to belabor this, but I think some of the flowers and stuff like that is the changing of seasons. I know they were up this summer, so maybe they got pulled.
They were, it's a long story. Our public works and parks crews are responsible for those. They do take great pride in them. So I know that might not appear that way. And we've certainly heard that comment from a few folks now. But they do take pride in the work that they do. Generally, I think they do a really great job. I think we all agree that the flower pots this year were not up to our standard. This year, the supplier that normally supplies all the plants for the pots, it's kind of like a kit. You know, they send a whole bunch of plants with a planting plan for those pots. They didn't do that this year, and so our guys tried to put something together on their own, and it just didn't. I think they would agree it didn't turn out like they hoped. So our supplier has told us that next year they'll be doing that again. So hopefully that'll solve some of that problem.
Cool. Hi. Sorry to answer. Yeah. Christmas lights, I think we'll always work on. They get better every year I'm here.
Yeah, I
So
mean, we've added to our Christmas lights decorations every year that I've been here.
it's great.
We get a lot of positive feedback about them, but I hear it if there are folks who don't think that they're real sufficient. So
All right. We'll move on now to Butch and Sarah Lincoln and Butch House. Thank you.
My name is Sarah Lincoln, and I live at 236 East State Highway 56. And Butch is outside with the ranch house.
Okay.
I may use some of his time, I may not.
That's fine.
What I'm here to update you on is the purchase of Newell Farm as a town park. And just a context setting, the closing on that purchase is January 2nd of 2023, if all goes well. So we're here just to give you an idea of what's happened since the last time we were here, which was 2 weeks ago on September 13th. So since then, the estoppel statement deadline passed on September 23rd. And that means that our tenant farmer, his acknowledgement that his lease will be with the town instead of us after the closing, that's done. Aaron, your legal staff, with Pete's permission, your legal staff that does water sent us a form to authorize the town to look into the water share that we're selling with the land. And we signed that authorization and we returned it. So the town is now free to look into that water share with Loveland Lake and Ditch. Chris sent us an email asking for a contact for phase 1 of the environmental assessment. And we designated Butch as a contact. And I believe, Chris, you got that email? Okay. So the environmental assessment sounds like phase 1 of it will be started soon. And Aaron sent us what's called a quit claim for surface rights. And we're reviewing that. That is making sure that because we're not selling the mineral rights with the land, the leases that we have with different oil companies going forward could allow them to put a fracking site on the land if it isn't quit claimed away. So the surface rights to that land are quit claimed. And so we're reviewing that and we'll return that very soon. Then no one can get on top of that land and ruin the park. So that's what's happened in the last couple of weeks. What's next is we're working on what's called the Reservation of Life Estate. And it's also called the Use and Occupancy Agreement. That's the part of the purchase that allows us to stay on 5 acres of the 12.5 until we die. That was something that we chose to negotiate after we got under contract. And we're going to go ahead and get that taken care of as soon as possible. We're almost done with it. And we're going to negotiate with Aaron and Chris on that in the next handful of weeks. And the reason is because very soon here, some things it's going to be a tidal wave of things that Chris and Aaron are responsible for. It's a big deal. So the first part of that tidal wave is the survey. The survey is due in less than a month. So October 24th. And Chris, we haven't heard from anybody regarding the survey. So,
yeah.
And then in less than 2 months, which is November 22nd, there's a whole list of things that are going to have to be, they will be terminated, meaning they need to be completed before November 22nd so that the town can review them and decide if there are objections, et cetera. And I'm just going to list some of these, the survey and anything with regard to the title, both off record and on record. And just so you know, we have nothing to reveal off record in the title. We know of nothing that isn't on record. So we won't be producing that. But then there's the water rights, mineral rights, the inspection, the environmental inspection, the ADA evaluation, the looking at the lead-based paint. There isn't any as far as we know. And et cetera. So all of that is due on the 22nd or the termination deadline goes past on the 22nd. So, there's about 6 weeks left to get all of that done. And that's why we're going to work on the Reservation of Life Estate now and get that taken care of before this tidal wave hits. So that's it. So my request is to understand what is happening with the survey and make sure that we are aware when those folks come out because of our downfalls. And so if I can't hear about that now, I'd like to hear about that this week. I would, if we could, please. Thank you. Any questions?
None for you. Trustees, have any questions? Ms. Lincoln? Administrator Crick, do you feel comfortable responding to any of that now about any of the upcoming stuff?
Just the survey, we've talked to our engineering firm. We're trying to work on getting something scheduled for the 23rd. Perfect.
Yes, the 24th. Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
All right. Is anyone in the audience would like to speak under public comment but did not have a chance to sign up? Okay. Move on now to consent agenda.
If I may, just real quick before you move on, just an answer to the question. I pulled up our street maintenance plan that's on our website. Streets in downtown Franklin, Lake, Turner, 6th, 7th, 3rd, 4th, they're all scheduled for next year, 2023.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yep. We'll move on to consent agenda. Would trustees like anything removed from consent agenda? Your motion to approve.
I move to come out and approve those minutes on the consent agenda.
Second,
Second?
trustee Hardy has moved the consent agenda. Trustee Murphy has seconded. Clerk, may a roll call vote.
Mayor Pro Tem Gray,
Yes.
trustee Harvey,
Yes.
trustee Ayers,
Yes.
trustee Murphy,
Yes.
trustee Dorsali,
Yes.
trustee Butler,
Yes.
Mayor Parsons.
Yes, all right. Consent agenda is approved unanimously. We'll move on now to item number 2, which is appointments to our town committees. We had 3 interviews scheduled last night. Unfortunately, the tree committee interviews, the applicant could not make it. He was out of town. So as far as I know, yeah, we still have planning and zoning, HPAC, correct? And then that's important. Thanks. Okay, so with planning commission, I'll turn that over to trustee Hardy.
Mayor Karstoik.
Yes.
Could I be removed?
Oh, absolutely.
Due to a conflict with one of the applicants?
That makes sense. Thank you very much. I can
Thank
come
you.
get you if you'd like. Or you can sit back, whatever you want to do.
It's all right. I'll step out.
Okay. We'll start with the planning commission, and that was trustee Butler, right? And trustee Hardy?
Yes.
Okay. Would you guys like to speak to that or?
Sure. We had 2 applicants last night. One was Clifford Bretting and the other was Scott Slaw. Scott's a local. He grew up in Milliken, has lived in Berthoud for 8 years. Clifford, he prefers to go by Brett, former Longmont resident, not Berthoud, Boulder High School grad, then has been traveling around for the last 30 years and has just recently come back to call Berthoud as a retiree, living up in Heron Point. We actually chose to go with Brett with his background in commercial development and his knowledge and expertise in that area of building, small to medium sized grocery stores and small communities and working with small communities. So he's been on that side of the table for the last 30 years, and now he wants to be on this side of the table. So we thought the 3 of us thought he'd be a good fit to add to the commission and bringing some of that other expertise that most of us don't have. So Brett Wing is our planning commissioner for the next 3 years.
Okay. Rendition, anything to add?
Just that, yeah, this is the seat that I vacated that we're filling, so I had a vested interest to hopefully turn over in good hands. Both applicants are, I think, more than qualified. So we had a good dilemma on our hands to make the pick, and I think Brett Wing will serve our town good.
Awesome. Trustees, any questions? Either of you like to move on there?
I can. I move to appoint Clifford Brett Wing to the Planning Commission for a term to expire on May 11th, 2024.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right. Trustee Butler has moved. Trustee Hardy has seconded. Clerk, we have a roll call vote, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Gray,
Yes.
trustee Butler,
Yes.
trustee Dorsali,
Yes.
trustee Ayers,
Yes.
trustee Harvey,
Yes.
Mayor Parsons.
Yes. Okay, we can move on now to HPAC, Historic Preservation Advisory Committee, and that was trustee Hardy, right? And
Yeah.
oh, okay. You guys like the date what happened or the recommendations?
Yeah, I'll go again first. Help that in. We've got 2 returning seats that are coming in, Kathy Carpiel and Earl Pasqua. They've both been on the committee for the last 3 years and enjoyed it. And Earl's had a lot of good input, as well as Kathy. She's our second chair, I believe. And then another applicant, Leslie Moore, who I was excited to see because it's one I've been hoping to get, that we all kind of were concerned about not having this type of person come on our board because of limited as just the city limits. But her background is in historical architecture. So she understands all the tax credits and everything involved around Colorado's history and tax credits for buildings and the importance of people's homes being restored and maintained and obtaining those grants and things like that. So we're going to have a nice little bit of expertise in that way from a state level. And she works for a company down in Denver, ERO Resources. And she said that would less likely be possible of a conflict of interest, but it all depends on if we ever plan to do anything with them up there. So, but yeah, I really liked her. She's one of those history, I don't want to offend her, but history nerds.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
She loves history. She loves, the whole background has really dove into it as a career. So I look forward to having her input and expertise on the board. And I've even invited her downwill to maybe join us at Main Street with maybe getting the church thing project
Oh, cool.
going again. So,
Awesome. So 2 returning and 1 new one.
yeah. And we still have 1 seat available. So if there's anybody out there that is in earshot, wants to be on historic preservation, we have the seat still open
Great.
as well.
Okay, anything to add?
Just that it was a pleasure to be part of that interview process. I learned a few things along the way, to be honest. And to echo Trustee Hardy's, comments, I think the committee is in good hands and a lot of passion for history. And I think Leslie does bring some fresh blood and perspective to that committee that can do Bertha good.
Excellent. Trustees, any questions for that interview? Should I make a motion again, Trustee Hardy?
Sure. Let's see here. Board member may approve. I've moved to appoint. I just lost my names. Kathy Carpiel, Earl Fastball, and Leslie Moore to the Historic Preservation Advisory Committee for the term of 2 years.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, Trustee Hardy's moved again and Trustee Butler is second again. Clerk, may I have a roll call vote?
Trustee Sorensen,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Grace,
Yes.
Trustee Ayers,
Yes.
Trustee Butler,
Yes.
Trustee Hardy,
Yes.
Mayor Carter.
Yes. Okay, and our final one tonight is the Parks, Open Space, Recreation and Trails Committee. That was going to be Trustee Murphy and Trustee Ayers. Trustee Murphy had a conflict because his wife, Anna Murphy, was one of the applicants. So I took over and helped Carl out with the interview, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so we had 2 seats available, 2 applicants. Luckily, both applicants were incredibly qualified for the position. Anna Murphy has a background in agriculture and water, which was going to be pretty useful, hopefully. And applicant Callie West had a lot of experience on different boards across the state and the world. But being a new resident, she is kind of concerned with the newer aspects of town with growth. But she's also focused on a lot of outdoor activities. She worked for a ski club. I can't remember the exact, the Grand Mesa Nordic Council for a while. So she has a lot of experience with outdoor activities and recreation. And so even though there were 2 seats and only 2 applicants, I don't think that colored our opinions of the 2 applicants. I think they were both strong, and I think they're going to benefit Port really well. So, Mayor, did you have anything?
I think you nailed it. And just they're both really qualified, and it was really great to see they both will bring great things to the Port Committee. And just I'll highlight Anna as after our board retreat and wanting to focus this year on open space preservation and some concerns on water. Anna really wrapped that right into her interview with her background, working in agriculture for a living. And she works with water and also on conservation easements sometimes. So we thought that was really great.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought they were both great. Yeah, that was a great overview. Any questions, trustees? All right, trustees, you want to make that?
Yeah, so I will move to appoint Anna Murphy and Callie West to the Parks, Open Space, Recreation and Trails Committee for a term of 2 years.
All right, trustee Ayers has moved on that. Trustee Hardy has seconded. Any final discussion, trustees? Clerk, we have a roll call vote, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Grace,
Yes.
Trustee Sorensen,
Yes.
Trustee Hardy,
Yes.
Trustee Ayers,
Yes.
Trustee Butler,
Yes.
Mayor Carter.
Yes. All right. And we still have a trees interview coming up, right? Correct? We'll have to do that when the applicant returns.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll need to reschedule that possibly the Monday before the next meeting, which I believe is October 10th.
Okay. Bring that up in the reports. Okay, let's move on now to
I'm gonna
item.
go get trustee room.
Yes, please. Thank you. I almost said that to you. when you didn't. Thank you, trustee Ayers.
He's like a big dog somewhere. See the buzzer.
Yeah.
Trustee Murphy, you'll have no lack of dinner time conversations about the town now. Have both things on there. Congrats and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 3 now. Habitat for Humanity fee waiver request. Is planner Freeze in the room?
He's not, he was doing some, family stuff. So, if you don't mind, I'll just.
Absolutely.
As the board may be aware, each year Habitat for Humanity makes a request for a waiver of building permit fees, including capital investment impact fees, under an ordinance that was adopted, ordinance number 847. That ordinance was adopted to promote homeownership for persons of lower income in the town of Berthoud. And it gives the Board of Trustees the authority to waive any or all fees for a maximum of 2 houses per year. And so Habitat for Humanity has come and made that request for this year, like we've been doing for many, many years. The 2 homes will be located at 1762 and 1764 North 4th Street. The total cost of standard building permit fees for an average Habitat home is over $30,000. And so getting those waivers does help to keep those homes affordable and help them to be able to progress with construction and keep their project moving forward. And staff would recommend that you approve the Habitat for Humanity fee waiver request for 1762 and 1764 North 4th Street, pursuant to ordinance number 37. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Do we have anyone from Habitat in there?
I don't think so.
Okay. Trustees in?
We have done these on consent the last couple of years, but
Yeah, sometimes Jan shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Trustees, any questions? Anyone in the audience like to speak, please? All right.
So the 2 fees that remain are the water tap fee and the wastewater tap fee.
yes, that is what we did in 2021 last year. We waived all the fees except for the water tap fee and the wastewater tap fee. And we would recommend that you make that same waiver granted this year. So I apologize for not making that distinction. That was in your packet, but I didn't cover that.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, anything like to move?
I move to approve the Habitat for Humanity request to waive fees for 1762 and 1764 4th Street in the town of Berthoud.
Thank you. Is there a second? All right, Mayor Pro Tem Grace has moved on that. Was that Trustee Hardy? Has seconded. Any discussion, final discussion? Clerk, may a roll call vote on that, please.
Trustee Murphy,
Yes.
Trustee Butler,
Yes.
Trustee Sorsali,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Grace.
Yes.
Trustee Ayers,
Yes.
Trustee Hardy,
Yes.
Mayor Kirkland.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Habitat. Number 4 on our agenda is our oil and gas policy. This started in 2018 with our moratorium. 2019. Oh, Administrator Kirk, you'll be introducing this anyways, but we have Attorney Mike Foote here tonight to be presenting on this. Welcome and thank you for coming. And I'll turn it over to Administrator Kirk.
Yeah, I won't take a lot of time. As you know, Mr. Foote came before you previously, and we kind of talked about the process we may go through as we go into this rulemaking or regulatory policymaking process. He's here tonight to share with you some both information and thoughts about kind of tranche 1, if we can call it that, and location and siting for oil and gas facilities. I'll just turn it over to him if that's okay with you.
Welcome.
Very good. Well, good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, trustees. Thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate it. And I hope everyone's excited to talk about oil and gas tonight. It may not be quite as exciting as running a spacecraft into an asteroid, but hopefully it's relatively close. I want to just, well, first of all, hopefully you had a chance to read over the memorandum that was sent out last week. My presentation here is going to be following about the same kind of general outline, but it won't be as detailed. And of course, open it up to Q&A and hopefully some kind of idea of general or specific direction from the trustees or from the board at the conclusion of this. So I'll first start off and just draw your attention to the PowerPoint presentation. And I think I gave maybe a very quick outline of the presentation, but just to be a little more specific, first, I'd like to go through what I have proposed to be the process I'm not all that familiar with the typical process that you all have here. So of course, it's just a proposal at this point. But I wanted to put it down on paper anyway to start discussion from that proposal. I'll talk a little bit about the review of the 3 tranches that we talked about last time, or at least we decided to go with the 3 different tranches of oil and gas regulations last time. And then we'll focus on tranche 1, which is, as Administrator Kirk mentioned, is about location and siting. In other words, setbacks and reciprocal setbacks. Reciprocal setbacks are otherwise known as reverse setbacks. I may actually just call them reverse setbacks because it's easier to say, but it's really referring to the same thing. So like this kitten, you may be disappointed it's only Tuesday, it's far away from the weekend. Maybe also that this is only the first tranche of oil and gas discussion, but I think it's actually the reason why I'm recommending this process that we'll go over in just a second. I think it'll be an efficient way and also a comprehensive way to go through new oil and gas regulations should you decide to approve them. So the proposed process goes like this. The first meeting, this is meeting 1. This is where I will introduce or at least talk about some of the tranche 1, otherwise the setbacks or reverse setbacks type of regulations that we see in other jurisdictions and open it up for questions and discussion about after that. The next meeting, again, just what I proposed would be that I would come back to you with some kind of a rough draft, take into consideration your direction. It doesn't have to be, and I would not necessarily expect it to be exact, where you would say, okay, we want to have exactly X number of feet for a setback or exactly X number of feet for a reverse setback. Maybe you will, but if you don't, it's not the end of the world. It could be kind of a fill in the blank type of situation for further discussion. And by the way, also, if you do have questions that would get into more of attorney-client, then we would want to do an executive session, I think, before this next meeting. We could do it at any time, of course, at your discretion, but there may be some questions that you have, like what's our legal exposure to this, or what's as far as we can go, or what's those types of things that may require more of kind of an attorney-client discussion and executive session. So you may want to consider putting that before meeting number 2. And then meeting number 3 would be more of a final draft of tranche 1, coming back with, again, your direction, public comment if there is any, and just get a general idea of if the majority of the board approve what's in that language. And that would be the end of tranche 1. And you might predict then the proposal is to repeat the process for tranche 2, which would be roughly public health, safety, welfare, and environmental regulations that would surround the new oil and gas operations that the board would approve if the board does approve new operations. So then we would go into tranche 3, which would be more like the process, the permitting process, for example. It could also, or would include things like enforcement, if you wanted to put that in there, and then financial assurances and maybe more of a general kind of miscellaneous. But the idea is, first and foremost, that at least under this proposal, that you might want to figure out location first, and then go into public health, safety, and welfare and environmental regulations, and then go into some of the other parts of the process, like permitting, the permitting process, the review process, financial assurances, and enforcement. And then the next 2 meetings would be a rough draft or maybe a first reading of the full ordinance when you put together the board direction from tranche 1, 2, and 3. And then the final meeting could be a final vote on that particular full ordinance. So tranche 1 location, as I mentioned, that involves things like setbacks. Now, what setbacks are would be the location that the new oil and gas facility would have to be from certain other things. The most commonly discussed and debated thing for setbacks would be a residential home, a residence. But there are other things that you would want to consider putting a new oil and gas location away from, a certain amount of feet away from, like schools, like hospitals, like apartment buildings, perhaps even things like parks or recreation centers, senior living centers, those types of things. So it could be just buildings. It could also be locations, as I mentioned, open space or parks. Also, other jurisdictions, and we'll go into that in a minute, have also put in setbacks from water. So you will probably want to at least consider doing the same kind of thing here. And setbacks from pipelines. And these are generally underground pipelines like flow lines and gathering lines. But there have been some jurisdictions that have put in setbacks from pipelines. And then we would get into the reciprocal or the reverse setbacks. And what those are, just as the name pretty much says, is that it's reversed from a regular setback, meaning that it would be how far away a new building would go from an existing oil and gas location. And there are several of those already within the town. And so, and in fact, there's already something in your ordinance about what I would consider to be a reverse setback, which you see in your packet and we can discuss further. But you'll want to talk about that kind of reciprocal setback as well, because oil and gas locations can cause issues or have risks, regardless of whether or not the building went in first or the oil and gas location went in first. So that's the point of talking about the reverse or reciprocal setbacks. Okay, so these graphs are taken from the memorandum here in a little bit different format, but I am not planning on going through them word for word, of course, but just highlight a couple of things. So first, again, we have setbacks from structures and areas. What we've done here is look at the comparable jurisdictions, and these were discussed at the last meeting about whether or not to take a look at some local jurisdictions as well as the state to see what they're doing. And you have an idea of what some other jurisdictions are doing. This is not a comprehensive list. There's several other jurisdictions that have their own local regulations, but these comparison jurisdictions like Broomfield, Erie, Larimer County, and Superior offer a little bit different perspectives based on size, the level of oil and gas activity. Of course, Larimer County is your county, or at least most of your town, but Superior is of similar size. Erie and Broomfield have had a lot of oil and gas development within their town limits. And so it's, I think, important to take a look at those and see what they've done and how they've tried to address some of the impacts. The COGCC, of course, is the state agency, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and their regulations apply to local facilities unless the local jurisdiction decides they want to go above and beyond. And that was a result of Senate Bill 19-181, which was enacted in the state legislature back in 2019. So the COGCC has regulations and they apply statewide unless the town of Berthoud or others decide they want to have different regulations that are more protective than what the COGCC has done. So just highlighting a couple of things from this particular setback slide. Well, first of all, I wanted to mention, I did mention Senate Bill 181. Senate Bill 181 did not mention any kind of specific setback distances. That was not in the legislation. And so there's nothing in state law that says that the setback distance has to be X. The COGCC went through a very extensive rulemaking called the Mission Change Rulemaking back in 2020, where they came up with Rule 604, which you see is the one that's right underneath Berthoud. And they came up with, you can split them into really two categories. They came up with what I classify as a hard setback, which is just, this is the setback. There's no exceptions built into the rule. There could be a variance, which the COGCC has a process, and I believe you do too, but there's nothing that's internally written into the rules. So it's a hard setback. Like, for example, the COGCC has a hard 2,000-foot setback from schools and child care centers. Now, the COGCC has a, what I call a soft setback from residential areas. They say that it could be up to 2,000 feet and it should be up to 2,000 feet unless one of four exceptions is met. One of those exceptions is if there's informed consent from the person that's living in the residence, for example. And if those exceptions are met, or at least one of those are met, then it can go down to 500 feet. So it's really effectively between a 500-foot and a 2,000-foot setback. That's kind of what I mean by a soft setback. So you'll see going through here that there's really a combination of soft and hard setbacks when you look at the localities. For example, Broomfield has a hard setback. Larimer County has a soft setback. And Erie is, looks like it's, I think it's mainly a hard setback anyway, but they also have discretion written into the rules for the trustees there to actually go above and beyond and say, well, we think in this case, actually, it should be a 2,500 foot setback. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that many of these local jurisdictions have zoning restrictions as well. So not only do they have, say, a 1,000 foot setback or a 2,000 foot setback, but they also just allow new development in certain zoning areas like agricultural or industrial and not residential. So you may want to consider going that route as well. The other thing to consider here is that there is the raw distance, like a 2,000 foot setback, but also it can start and stop at various places too. So it could start at, say, the wellhead of the new facility. It could start at the edge of the well pad of the new facility. It could start at the boundary line of the new facility. And then if you go over to the affected building, like a residence, again, it could go to the parcel line of the new, or of the old residence. It could go to the actual residence itself. And so this is handled differently depending on the jurisdiction. And there's really no rhyme or reason, actually. The COGCC has their way and they're measuring, and some of the local jurisdictions have their way of measuring where the setbacks start and stop. Okay, the next would be setbacks from water. And again, it's pretty much a similar explanation here. It varies. As you can see, it varies between 500 and 2,000 feet in the setbacks from water. Obviously, I think this would probably depend on what kind of water bodies and streams you have here. Some of these also do not allow any kind of a new facility in a floodplain. And so you'll want to take a look at that probably. Next includes setbacks from pipelines. And as I mentioned, these are typically things like gathering lines and flow lines that are buried, but they do present dangers sometimes as well. They can leak and they can cause hazards. You may recall there was one very publicized incident tragedy that occurred in Firestone in 2017 where somebody's house blew up as a result of an underground pipeline that had been severed and then not turned off. And so that pipeline, or that well site, was about 175 feet away from that person's house. And the pipeline came within, I think, 9 feet of that person's house. So this is part of the reason why there are some jurisdictions that have considered setbacks from pipelines as well, because they can pose hazards just like the rest of the oil and gas facility. One thing of note that is interesting, at least in my opinion, when it comes to these pipeline setbacks is Broomfield does a case-by-case basis as part of their permit review process. Broomfield typically has, I would consider to be some of the most protective local regulations in the state. But in this case, they just don't have anything laid out like a 500 foot or a 200 foot type of setback from pipelines. They do it on a case-by-case basis. And so this is something also you can consider incorporating into your regulations or your revisions of the regulations. If you want it to be a case-by-case type of review, then that's possible, and you can discuss that. Okay, now on to the reciprocal or reverse setbacks. I'll just note a couple of things here. As I mentioned before, there already is, I think, a reverse setback type of part in your ordinance that was passed previously. The Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, because it's a state agency, does not have jurisdiction over reverse setbacks because it's a local land use issue. So they don't even play in this sandbox. Broomfield, Erie, Larimer County all have reverse setbacks, and those were all pretty recently implemented after a fairly robust debate. These reciprocal setbacks are some difficult land use issues because, as I'll go over, I think in a little more detail in a minute, they could involve putting swaths of land off limits for quite some time. There are wells that produce for up to 30 years. And so if you have a, say, 2,000 foot reverse setback from a well that's producing for 30 years, that's 2,000 foot radius that cannot be developed for 30 years. And so there are, of course, trade-offs and land use discussions that go with reciprocal setbacks. Superior does not have any. I'm not sure why. It could be that there are few or maybe even no existing wells within Superior. They're kind of a little bit off of the edge of the Denver-Julesburg Basin. It really kind of ends, at least the wells that we've seen recently, ends around Lafayette. And so anything that's south and west of there is not really being developed. So that could be the reason. I'm not quite sure why, but at any rate, there's 3 other local jurisdictions that do have these relatively new reverse setbacks. I'm put up this graph here, or it's not a graph, it's really just a photo that was created by Adam Ollinger and on the staff. He created 3 others as well. I'm assuming that you received those recently, but the point of this is just to give you a visual representation of what these reverse setbacks would look like. Of course, there's a lot of detail to it, and you have to kind of maybe put on your reader glasses like I do if you want to look at some of these and parse out the colors. But you'll see there's one color that represents the already plugged wells, and there's another color that represents wells that are not plugged. And the reason why I say they're not plugged is because some of these wells may be producing. Some of these wells may not be producing at the moment. They may be inactive, but they're also not plugged. And so there's really a distinction between wells that are plugged and wells that are not plugged when it comes to, I think, what is generally perceived to be the risk of the area. Although even a plugged well presents risks, and there are a few examples pretty close to here as well as in Broomfield of plugged wells that have created problems after they've been plugged. And so that will need to be considered as well. I mean, once they're plugged, it doesn't mean that the risk goes away forever. And particularly those that have been plugged prior to 2018, when new plugging rules and wellhead integrity rules went into effect at the COGCC, there's a big difference between the new and the old rules. We have tens of thousands of wells that have been plugged under the old rules. And so that will be something that you'll probably want to consider. So roughly, there'll be a number of decision points and hopefully some kind of at least general thought or general direction that we get from this discussion tonight. One would be what you are thinking about regular setback distances, from also what types of structures and or types of areas like open spaces or parks or recreation areas, etc. Pipeline setbacks, whether to do them, if so, what kind of distances roughly. And the same would go for reciprocal setbacks and then phases of reciprocal setbacks. I kind of was alluding to this before, but when you have wells in different phases, they generally have different amounts of risk. And so the producing wells will have more risk generally than the plugged and abandoned wells, for example. And so what some local jurisdictions do is they distinguish between the pre-producing phases, which are the drilling, the fracking, the completions phases, maybe early production, like the first year after it's producing, and then they'll distinguish between that and then the producing phase, which could be the next, say, 20 years, and then the plugged and abandoned phase, which then hopefully will just go on forever. So you may want to take a look at that graph as well and compare and just see what you're thinking along those lines. We can, of course, explore that if that's the board's direction. So that is the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to open it up for any kind of questions or discussion or
Thank you,
whatever.
Attorney Foote. Trustees, I apologize. I thought this was informational. I didn't know there were some decision points tonight. So we'll have to go with it on the fly. Any questions for Attorney Foote?
A couple that popped up about the lines themselves. I know I've mentioned before requiring them to have them removed. But could we designate active and inactive lines, kind of like we do plugged and unplugged wells for setbacks?
You mean the gathering lines and the flow lines?
And then if removal is not an option, is there a way to like maybe somehow fill them, like purge them, fill them with like a substance that hardens and then make sure that there's no remaining gas kind of hanging out in there that would eventually leak and cause an explosion later if someone accidentally hit one?
So the first part is whether or not you can distinguish between the active and inactive roughly. And I think so. That hasn't been done with other jurisdictions, but there's no reason why we could not explore that for pipelines as well. And so, for example, I think what you're getting at is if the well is a producing well, then the setback would be 100 feet from the pipeline, as opposed to if it's not producing, and then the setback would be 50 feet. I think that's what you're getting at there. Okay. Certainly we can explore that and see, but like I said, there's no other jurisdiction that I'm aware of that's done that, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be explored and bring it back for further consideration.
And there's no other jurisdictions that required basically packing out what you've packed in philosophy on gas and oil and gas stuff.
That is, I think what you're getting at is part of the plug and abandon process that the COGCC requires. They require remediation of the lines as well. So you can't just plug the well and then leave the lines in place. You have to actually take care of the lines as well. So that also, I think, would probably trend into the COGCC's jurisdiction. Roughly speaking, the COGCC has jurisdiction over everything that happens below ground. And locals have jurisdiction, in addition to COGCC, about stuff that happens above ground. So stuff that happens with land use, for example, is clearly within local jurisdiction, as well as COGCC if the locals don't want to do it. But when you get into how you plug a well, how you take care of those lines underground, then you could be getting into COGCC's exclusive jurisdiction about that.
So it is possible to have them just removed entirely, and then you don't have to worry about inactive lines because they're not there.
Right. Now the caveat that I'll put in there is that wells can be quote unquote inactive. There's different phases of the wells, but let's just say that they're inactive, meaning they're not producing for quite some time before they're plugged. So this is a problem. It'd be better if the wells aren't producing, that they're plugged immediately, but often there could be a waiting period of years before they're actually plugged.
Can we put that in our code that says if a well is inactive for so many days or months, then it has to be plugged? That goes along with plugging a well goes there, because how long can a well sit inactive? And how often do they come back online after they've sat inactive?
Mm-hmm.
Because we might get back there again in 10 years. Well, proves to me that well could be as viable as being inactive again or active again. Otherwise, plug it and get out.
Let me look more into that question, but also maybe save the explanation or further discussion for that for an executive session, because I think that might get into some kind of legal advice and legal exposure.
That's been a good question.
Jump in here real quick. That's good. Just say presentation or possible direction. I don't see we could get through all these 11 decision points next.
Yeah,
15
and I don't,
minutes.
for what it's worth, I don't think that there's any intention of you going through and making all of these decisions tonight.
That would be the
You
direction.
might- And Mr. Foot can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the decision points that were outlined in the memo that he provided that was in your packet were there to just kind of provide you some things to think about in terms of discussion, questions that you might want to ask that we might want to look into. I think similar to what Trustee Hardy just asked, so that as we start to prepare a draft set of regulations for you, we have some both context and then direction about kind of where you guys want us to focus and kind of, again, I don't, there's no expectation, I don't think from my perspective or from Mr. Foots, but again, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you would say we want a 2,000 foot setback tonight. I mean, that's not what we're asking.
Because the discussion could go one in a million ways tonight, depending on this is just such a massive thing, and that's why you're proposing, almost a year's worth of discussion on this.
Right. I think actually that is correct. I don't want to stand up in front of you and apologize if I created the impression that we want the answer to all these questions now.
No, I didn't take that. So what direction what would you like from us tonight?
Well, I'll give you an example. Last time at the meeting, I think I heard from you, Mayor, maybe a couple other trustees, that let's try to do something that's as protective as we can, that wouldn't expose us, to a successful lawsuit or something along those lines. And so, if that continues to be the direction, then and the majority of the board thinks that that's a good way to go, then for the next particular meeting, I can draw up some potential regulations for setbacks that I think could maybe fulfill that particular direction.
Is it
So
possible to, because we have a new trustee and I know there's kind of a myriad of, mine might have been more extreme, just anything that won't open up to a lawsuit, to have options? Or is that going to take it into 2 years of work for you?
no, I think we could probably present it as options. I think to maybe kind of play it out in the most straightforward manner, let's just say that you have one part of the ordinance that says setbacks shall be X number of feet. You could present it as a fill in the blank. You could also say 2,000 feet, 2,500 feet, 1,500 feet. Like you could kind of present maybe a multiple choice type of menu if that's what you're interested in.
Well, okay, I was just posing options.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I felt like it was really helpful to see the other neighboring areas that have different regulations and setbacks. And I personally would like to see more, because there's a lot of towns and cities that are close by. And I'd like to see that it would help me more for us to create kind of a clear path for Berthoud if we could see more. And then the other thing I feel like, and Trustee Hardy's question really, it resonated with this thought that I had, is that I'd really like to hear from an industry expert to fully understand the drilling and fracking process. Because as we make these decisions, I think I've even had relatives, and my ex-husband worked in oil and gas and explained it to me, and there's still so much to understand. But I feel like until we hear from an industry expert, we can't understand the process to understand which phases are dangerous or what the pipelines, what they're like after they plug and abandon. Like, there's still a lot of questions that we have before I want to make a policy decision.
So is that something that you'd like independent of Attorney Foote? I know he's pretty knowledgeable on that, but would you like someone in the industry to speak to
I'd like
that?
to hear what they'd have to say. And I have so many questions for them too, like safety regulations and how they implement them on their sites, so that we have a better understanding of how we want to maybe put further regulations on certain things if we have specific concerns. I just think that would be, after hearing this presentation, would be a natural progression for me to here's what other neighboring communities are doing and the state laws. Here's what the gas and oil industry does effectively and how we can understand that. And then I'd also like to encourage us to do as minimal executive sessions as possible, because I think this process will open us up to a lot of legalities if it's not public. And I think the public is going to have the same questions we have. So as many questions as we can ask in the meetings, I would encourage us to do that. And that's kind of why I want to have that next step. I don't know if anyone else is feeling that way. Like, there's more questions out there for the oil and gas side.
Well, the only thing I would add to that is if you're going to bring in an oil expert, and I would say bring in an oil expert on the opposite side as well. Because most people that are talking about their industry want to talk as positively as possible about it and not about the bad stuff. So if we're going to have experts, we need an expert that balances both sides.
Well, in all fairness, since I've been on the board and the several years prior to me being on the board that I attended the meetings, there were several experts that came in and talked about health concerns and the dangers, air quality. So all of those are on public record. And I'm not saying it wouldn't be bad to have that again, but in that time frame, I don't recall ever hearing from an industry expert. Or being able to ask them specific questions directly.
Right. There was no one on a panel. We heard in previous boards before when they actually presented on a fracking site, but you're right, we never had them on a panel. So I hate shooting from the hip. Is that, before the board even discusses that, is that a possibility? I mean, I just don't see how this.
I think, this is so much, I don't mean to sound like I'm passing the buck, but this is your policymaking process.
But you as an independent, I don't know if maybe with Attorney Footers, could you bring in, or would you know anyone that's an industry expert that's independent?
Certainly there are, Colorado Oil and Gas Association and others that I think could come and speak about the industry and how they generally operate. And the best practices that are generally followed and some of those kinds of things, if there's interest there. On the kind of the opposite side of the spectrum, I hate to use this term, I don't know how to describe it, kind of the anti-oil industry perspective. I'm not sure I know where the best place to look is. And some of those are probably subject matter experts, about air quality or water quality or those kinds of things. If there was real specific information you wanted there, we could try to go find some people that we might consider subject matter experts, at least kind of within their field of study. I think we can track down some of that kind of information for you if you felt like that was valuable.
So one other thing I could throw out there, of course, I mean, hearing from experts or others is your prerogative, and the more information could be the better, for sure. The Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission has a number of staffers. They have something like 60 to 70 people on staff there. This is their business every day, is to know oil and gas and regulate it from the state perspective. And little known provision in Senate Bill 181 was that the COGCC was supposed to set up what's called a technical review panel, which is designed actually to help local governments with their permitting decisions if they choose to ask for that kind of help. Now, no one really has done that yet. And I'm not sure if the COGCC really has put any much attention into doing that, but it could be worth discussion to see if there would be members of the COGCC that could provide that kind of technical expertise that you're looking for.
So do you think the CLGC would be a good middle of the road person versus an anti-person versus a pro person?
They're the regulator.
Yeah.
And I think if you asked, say, an oil and gas employee or an environmentalist that's against oil and gas, you might get different opinions about where the regulator is as far as whether or not they favor oil and gas, if that makes any sense. But they are the regulator and they have the technical knowledge. So
In a way, they're kind of the final say.
Well, I would guess that, the COGCC, I would assume that they would want to be, they would want the oil and gas industry to say that they're hard to work with, and they would want environmentalists to say that they're hard to work with, which means they probably fall somewhere in the middle. It's a little bit like what we do, right? When the community says you're not tough enough on development, and the developers say you're the hardest, entity to work with in Northern Colorado, then we're probably somewhere in the right spot. And so I would guess the COGCC employees would probably be somewhere in the middle as well.
what was your question, Mayor? I just,
No, I think that just answered it.
okay, great.
I can't even remember.
Yeah.
Trustee Sorsella, would that work for you to answer your question?
I'm gonna do that. As long as they're gonna have the, technical savvy, which they would, to be able to answer our questions and give us a presentation on the technical side of the industry. I think that would help us make a better policy decision.
And I think, if there are some specific questions that we would ask them to kind of answer, present on, it sounds like it might be things like, give them the basics of how fracking works and what you look at the COGCC when you're permitting a well and what that process looks like. Those things I think would be helpful and probably certainly within their wheelhouse, I would guess.
Right. So I'd be happy to contact COGCC and see who they could provide for that kind of discussion. And also, I do think that's right. And once that person is set up to have some questions ahead of time, that the person could be at least in their mind, knowing that they should be addressing, might be helpful.
So should we have like a deadline of when we should get you our questions that they can prepare a presentation for us?
We could do that. Sure. Again, I think that the process, as I said, is really going to be up to you, but I do think it'd be helpful at some point to get questions ahead of time to that particular person.
Do you think like a steering committee would be helpful? Like we had a committee of two to help bring an attorney on, which turned out to be you. Would you find a steering committee for this beneficial of trustees, or is it work fine with working with just staff and your knowledge?
I think that would be great. Sure. Whatever you would think would be better to take this big topic down to digestible parts and so that you can make decisions would be fine. And I'd be happy to work with the subcommittee or continue to work with staff as I have been.
I have no opinions on that. I just kind of did that as an option.
And I imagine it'd be both. I mean, it's be working with the steering committee and with the staff, just like I have been.
I think it might be faster and more productive to just let them work with staff. Let me just steer our questions to staff, and then as they meet, when they do.
Makes sense.
Then I actually have a question for your presentation. Couple slides back, it said substantially equivalent protections. Could you explain what those are?
Is that the Erie one?
Well, I mean, he was saying there's one of four different things that would be substantially equivalent protections. one of which is informed consent, which usually has a check tied to it. Sometimes it doesn't, that I'm aware of, but I'm also not aware of any of the others that are considered that as a way to get in further otherwise.
Yes, that's a good question, and I put the slide back up. It's under the CRGCC rule. I was chuckling because this is an area of contention with the CRGCC at the moment, because the rule was put into place where it could be an exception to the 2,000-foot soft 2,000-foot setback rule if somehow or another it's proven that a 700-foot setback has substantially equivalent protections to a 2,000-foot setback. I think the short answer is that no one really quite knows what that means. The CRGCC has approved a number of applications under the substantially equivalent protection exception. And what it's come down to is that the operator has just presented the best management practices and other technical details about how their proposed site would be protective of public health, safety, welfare, and the environment. But nobody has really gone through and said, I find that this 700-foot setback is substantially equivalent protections to 2,000-foot setback. They discussed that, but no one's really actually kind of laid out criteria for what would be substantially equivalent. So it's kind of mushy, in other words.
Cool. I love the gray matter and
Kind of
legal
like reasonable and
documents.
necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Okay. I was just curious if there were any, I guess, like, oh, if they do this kind of process that magically adds 500 feet of distance and a setback or reverse setback, but there's no hard and fast rule of what that is or is not. It's just kind of, well, they made a compelling case, I guess we'll kick in 600 feet imaginarily. Okay. So
Yeah.
I'll make sure I understood that.
And perhaps over time that will get further fleshed out.
Sure.
But as of now, I can't say that that standard exists.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, that was the big question I did have regarding your presentation.
Other questions? If I may, one of the things that Trustee Sorcelli brought up that might be helpful just to circle back on before we get too far down the road. She mentioned adding some other communities to the list of regulations to look at. Are there any in particular that come to mind? I think we had this discussion last time. That's kind of how we came up with this list. But if we need to expand that list, it would just be helpful to kind of know what the trustees wanted to, where you wanted us to look.
Yeah, these are we probably really asked for the most strict options for the higher end of the restrictions. That's how we arrived at these. Or other ones that had developed.
Not necessarily. I think well, Boulder County was not included. Boulder County is one of the more strictest jurisdictions. Boulder County was not included.
Adams isn't in there.
Adams is not included. Adams is kind of middle ground, I would say, in what they're doing. Broomfield was included because they have a lot of recent experience with oil and gas development, and a lot of their regulations were developed as a result of that experience. Erie was included for the same reason. Larimer County, of course, is the local government or the local county for most of Berthoud, and then Superior was kind of a similar size jurisdiction. So that's why. But if there's others that you all are interested in, we can, easily take a look and compare.
Since that one accident down in Firestone with the house blowing up, have they changed or updated their codes to be different since then?
I don't think so. Firestone, and there's a number of municipalities that will go through a process for permitting, but their code won't be any more protective than the CRGCC. That applies, I think, in most cases to Weld County as well. And so often with their standards, they just adopt the same type of standards as the CRGCC does. There are some jurisdictions like the ones that are outlined here that have gone above and beyond the CRGCC.
Okay, so asking for Greeley's or Johnstown's, you're essentially asking for Senate Bill 181.
We're asking for CRGCC rules. Essentially, it's not that way across the board. I think Weld County differs in some ways, but generally their regulations are not more protective than CRGCC.
I personally would like to see our neighbors like Johnstown, Loveland, Longmont. Because we have neighboring counties with all of those towns, and I'd like to see the difference in how they're all responding.
Loveland's still working on theirs, aren't they?
Think so. I'm not quite sure what's going on in Lebanon at the moment with their regs. I think there was a desire to update them, but I don't think they've been updated yet. And so, a lot of the locals will have old regulations, and that was before Senate Bill 181. But of course, we can look at those if you would find value in those.
I'd probably piggyback on what she said about looking at local communities closer to us, but the ones that have the most recent updates. So if it's like 10, 15 years old, I wouldn't bother. But if they've changed in like the last 1 to 2 years, that would be of interest. See what they've done.
Okay.
So when we were saying like neighboring or local, was that Windsor, Johnstown,
Recent neighboring
Milliken?
local.
So
So,
this could go a lot of places around this.
well, but if no one's updated their codes in 10 years, then that's showing us that list.
Okay.
So then you go look at who's updated in the last 5.
Are you
So
interested in Adams County or not?
Yeah, sure. Sounds great.
pick one and
I
add.
think we're just gonna do the whole front range now.
Well,
Well,
Yeah.
trustees, arguing point is, let's pull it down to a, I don't know, 50-mile radius that have probably visited this topic in 5 years.
Last, 1 to 5 years. Just kind of take a look at how long that list is.
All right. I didn't mean to
Thank
sound
you for
snooty.
being willing to do that. And thank you, Administrator, for circling back to that, because I think that it is helpful information. It gives us a fuller perspective.
Full on a la carte for this thing.
Do
Okay.
it better.
just so I'm clear, are you interested in the jurisdictions that have made revisions within 1 to 5 years, just knowing those? Or are you interested in also those that have made revisions in 1 to 5 years, being able to compare those?
I'd like to just know what their current codes are.
Okay,
Yeah, to put them in the comparison pile, I would say.
okay.
Because I'd be curious to know why they updated them or changed them in the last 1 to 5 years. What spurred it? I don't. Was it something that happened that they learned about that caused trouble? Or was it an accident? Was it something positive to bring more business? Was it something, I don't know. Everyone's got their own reasons as to why they changed the regulations.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could go quite that deep. I don't know if I can read the minds of
Well, no, I'm
those
not
folks.
looking for the exact reason why, but
Yeah.
somewhere along the lines, like we're looking at it because we don't have one.
Right.
But other places may have had one, but they updated it.
Yeah.
So something had to have changed. Like either they're just trying to match COGC, and if they're matching COGC, then to say they match COGC. That's all I need to know on that. But if they go above COGC, I'd be kind of curious to know why that particular town did it above COGC. What they did.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily need to know why, but
Right.
I'd like to see what they've done.
Well, the general dividing line is Senate Bill 181 that passed in 2019, and these local jurisdictions that have revised their regulations have done so after 181 because there was a lot of question before Senate Bill 181 whether or not the local jurisdictions had the authority to actually have more protective regulations.
So I'd almost say that most places probably wouldn't have updated them because we're just going to go to COGC. So why should we take the time to update our code, right? So they're probably on old code, but maybe the ones that did update either did it just to match COGC, or they went above and beyond, would be my guess.
I think it's mostly the latter, but not always. I mean, it's not always. If you look through all the regulations and you just get a flavor of it here with setbacks and reverse setbacks, but if you look at all the public health, safety, and welfare and environmental regulations and all the way through, you may have a jurisdiction that has a stricter or more protective regulation for 5 things, but similar to the COGCC in 10 things. So generally, I don't think you're going to see a jurisdiction that is all more protective than COGCC, although you might see that with, say, Broomfield or Boulder County.
But the why would be more for you because you'd be like, well, why did they update in the last year?
And what if they didn't apply? So,
Yeah.
yeah, so if you see anything there that just you don't think would apply to Berthoud at all, well, I guess then you get into the code. I'll say that. Sorry. Okay.
Because if they're just mentioning
Yeah, but-
COGCC and that's the only reason why they updated their code, then I'm like, well, just say they updated their code to be COGCC. But if you find, hey, this one, they updated their code because they had a town board that wanted to really spice up their code and they went above and beyond to kind of stay ahead of the COGC. That would be interesting to know too. Because like these cities here, and like you mentioned, they all went above and beyond COGCC. I think it's really based on their communities and what they're doing, but
Mhm.
none of them were Will County. And I think that's maybe where They
Right.
might be headings
Maybe
because
that's
Weld
better.
County is our biggest neighbor who has the most wells. And I can almost, based on what your facial expressions and your comments have made today, they're probably not going to be exceeding COGCC, but who knows? Maybe there is a one town over in Weld County that stepped up their game above and beyond. I don't know.
Mhm. Sure. What I can do then at some point in time before the next meeting is put together maybe kind of a general survey of local jurisdictions and which ones have not changed their code and which ones have, and just what I know about that, if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, I'd love to see Adams too, but I think that was a great criteria you just said, or just a great survey and overview.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
Okay.
Do you have anything, Justin Murphy?
Yeah, I have two questions regarding the presentation. Regarding the informed consent, is there a time limit on that? And how does that deal with renters on the property?
We've seen the informed consent with the COGCC and the way that they've dealt it. The way they've dealt with it is that, well, first of all, the operator goes out and gets the informed consent. There's not been an expiration date as far as I can tell, if that's was your first question. Dealing with renters, what the operator has typically done when they get informed consent is they've gotten it from the renter because they're the person that's living there at the time, but also there have been times that they've gotten informed consent from the owner as well as the renter.
They'd be equally acceptable.
Or would you need both?
That's up to the COGCC. And what has typically happened is that there's been a mix where the operator comes in, let's say that there's 15 residences that are within 2,000 feet of the proposed operation. Then the operator will come in with 7 informed consents. And then there's 8 that they have to show are substantially equivalent to 2,000 feet. That's typically how it's played out. So we haven't seen that exact question yet.
Okay. And then the second one, measuring a distance for these sites, is there a consistent idea of what, we're regulating from when it deals with the wellhead or the site, or is there some consensus behind that, I guess?
I don't know if I would say there's consensus, but one thing to consider would be that in a typical oil and gas facility, there's more than just the wellhead. They'll have the tanks, they'll have the pipelines, the above ground pipelines, they'll have the other parts of the operation there. So if you're just measuring from the well head, then and it's 2,000 feet from the well head to say somebody's house, then it really could be 1,300 feet between the farthest out tank or other part of the operation to that person's house. And so if your perspective is we need to have these things out farther rather than not as far, then that would be something that would probably concern you because, the well is not the only part of the operation.
Sure.
But there hasn't been any kind of consensus that I've seen around that. I'm not sure there's big enough sample size to say if there's been consensus.
Okay. Thank you.
Trustee Ayers.
Yeah, I just have one question, and this may be too much in the weeds for you, but with Broomfield being one of the more stringent communities on the list, do you have any idea why they chose to go case by case on the pipeline setbacks as opposed to a hard or a soft setback?
No, but I could probably find out. If you are really interested in that, I could talk with folks at Broomfield and see if they have any recollection as to why they did it that way.
I would appreciate that, just because since they are so specifically stringent in the rest of them, why are they doing that case by case issue, especially since the pipeline seems to have been the problem in Firestone? Thank you.
Any other questions, trustees? A couple comments. Sure. Can I open it up to the public real quick?
No, I'll let Jeff do his and then.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll be brief. So I guess our first comment on this is, and again, I know I'm a little new guy to this board. I am from Texas and I've been around and we got relatives in oil and gas. So it's a topic in Texas. Go figure. I'm quickly realizing, I think like the mayor mentioned, this is something that we can really dig into the weeds and overcomplicate it. So I guess my comment to us is to not overcomplicate it, and I would tend to lean towards the experts. I think we should get some, varying feedback and expert opinions, but I don't want to try to be an expert person. That's just my personal opinion. Question to staff real quick is, as we embark on this whole process, do we have any, because I'm newer, any time sensitivity with, I don't know if there's anything looming or pressuring us, what is our timeline overall?
I have to go. I know I should know off the top of my head. I think the most recent extension of the moratorium that we did on new oil and gas development applications is effectively until you adopt new regulations. There's nothing that's pending. We've met with one oil and gas operator in the last 3 years. He just kind of was poking around. They actually chose to locate their well in Weld County across the street from our city limits because they didn't want to deal with it. And so, outside of that, I don't know that there's anything pressing that's more pending in front of us.
Okay. And then the last comment I have is for some direction, I guess, as we dig into the specifics. And I think we've got some good examples of these other, towns. I would like to see more examples as well. But how does that impact some specifics with our town? We have unique landscapes and topographies and, our outlines of how our community is shaping out. So I'd like to understand, as before we just make a broad rule of a 2,000 foot, setback, how might that impact certain regions or areas of our town?
Yeah, I think the best place to start there is just with that kind of top down map of like this is what a 2,000 foot reverse setback would look like from existing wells. I'm going to give you some context. To go the other direction and say, here's all the properties that might be impacted by a new oil and gas well, and here's what 2,000 feet looks from them, might be a little tougher for us to map. But actually, we created our own little Google map a couple of years ago internally just because we were curious. It took us a little bit to draw 2,000 foot circles around all the houses we could find in the Weld County side. But
I think that'd be a helpful illustration for myself. At least.
Yeah. And the maps, I apologize. The maps that are included in Mr. Foot's presentation, they were prepared late last week and they did not make it in the packet. So we'll make sure that those get out to you and then they're available to anybody who has interest in the public. We're happy to share those as well.
Okay. That's all I have.
Yeah, that's a great question. I did promise the public, I'll open it up to them. And I think that's just a good general policy.
Ask one more question.
Yeah, it's a question. That's great. I was just worried about comments. We're
It
going
is a
back.
question. I'm sorry.
No, you don't be.
This was something I was thinking about before we came in, and then you touched on it in your presentation. It was really helpful. You mentioned how long a property is restricted once those setbacks are in place, because it's a 30-year, could be a 30-year well. And my question, I guess, is what kind of liability does the town have if we restrict landowners from being able to use or develop their property the way they choose? Have we seen any other lawsuits or liability issues with other municipalities due to that?
That is going to get into a legal discussion that you may want to consider for executive session.
Is there a reason that can't be publicly discussed?
Well, I mean, generally, your question is what kind of liability could be attached to a reverse setback? And generally, I would say that, the general rule is if the town implements something that is for the reasons of public health, safety, welfare, and the environment, and it's reasonable, then that's within the town's power to do so. But if you want to get into specific instances or, cases or legal advice about how much this would open us up to liability, those types of things, my discussion with the town attorney prior to this leads me to think that we might want to err on the side of caution and maybe doing that in an executive session.
And for what it's worth, I think, any decisions you make will be done publicly, right? You can't make decisions in executive session. As it relates to giving you legal advice about decisions that you might make, it's in the interest of the town and protecting the town as an entity and as a community, not to give people who might choose to sue the town a playbook to do so, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
But I am sensitive to your thoughts about making sure that this is a public and open process. So I don't want to create the impression that I'm trying to shirk that. But I do think it gets into a little bit of a issue when you're talking about attorney-client representation and making sure that that privilege isn't waived.
And my goal is to make sure that the town is able to proceed without liability issues. I want to make sure that that's not going to be an ongoing thing. So thank you for your advice.
Any other questions? All right, I did promise to open up to the public. It may very well be that no one wants to speak to this, but would anyone like to address the board? Sir.
Lynn Larson, 205 Hubble Street. These comments are being made on the fly, so maybe a little disjointed. I spent nearly 30 years working as a regulator, one way or another. So I agree with Administrator Kirk that as a regulator, you're often damned if you do and damned if you don't. But I also recognize what Trustee Sorcelli was saying about getting expert advice. Now, I worked for what would be, I considered it a consumer protection agency, or two agencies actually. Sometimes the consumer organizations didn't think we were doing that very well. But often the industry felt we were being too harsh on them. But it was always useful to get expert advice from both sides of the issue, recognizing that from the consumer side, they're going to be biased a little more towards the sensational stuff. This is going to kill everybody in 10 years type of stuff, to make a point. Whereas my own personal bias was that the industry was trying to get by with the least stuff they could. But it's useful to have both views presented, especially if you get true experts. And as we know from court hearings, I guess, true experts, when you have a court case, true experts are presented on both sides. So you have to have your own judgment, use your own judgment when you listen to the experts and decide what is their bias and how badly has that bias moved it from a real position, a real honest consumer protection position. So I think you should go with Trustee Sars. I promoted you. Trustee Saraselli's recommendation, and get some experts in on both sides to give you their points of view and what's the scientific basis, what's the technical basis, especially on the technical side. What's the technical basis and the scientific basis for their viewpoints? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience?
There, we can have someone online.
Anyone else in person here? Okay. The person online could state your name and address, please.
Hello, it's Christine Torres, 3930 Arley Drive.
We can't get your audio.
Can you hear it?
There we go.
All right. Christine Torres, 3930 Arley Drive.
Thank you.
All right. Just a couple real quick things. I did sell a house 2 blocks from the house that had that explosion. So I had a question on I did read through that packet on number 11, in speaking to how accurate the mapping is of plugging the plugged and abandoned pipelines. Like, I'd love an expert to speak to that, because that is of concern. As far as the experts go, I do have someone that I could throw out to you guys. Her name is Maria Petrucco. She is a oil and gas attorney. And now I'm not sure who I don't know if you're getting a panel or what you're doing, but she's highly, oh my gosh, she's been doing it for many, many years, and I've utilized her for clients. But she taught classes on this, and that's how I met her in the first place, of oil and gas policy. So I could send you that information. And then lastly, as far as when I was reading through your packet on page 50, it talked about a study that they used when they made it, and it compiled over 2,200 studies, but I couldn't click on the link. Like it looked like you could click on it. So I thought that the trustees might want to read that as well as the public. And then on page 51, on your packet, talked about Broomfield's, again, it was a comparison jurisdiction that you guys used for this information, and it talked about the health effects of the community survey. Now, of course, that might be biased because it's just such a small sample, but it was another local, when you guys are talking about local and the whys, that might be a good thing to look at of why Broomfield did some of the stuff is by looking at their study. But anyways, I just would love to get the information about the packet on page 50 to be able to read through that study. And I could, again, give you guys Maria's information. And then lastly, when you do ask the experts, see how accurate that mapping is, because I just don't want anything like that to happen to us. So that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. Just tried, our hyperlinks work, so maybe clerk, if they're not working online, we could get those link up. Okay, great. And sure, I don't want to speak for the board, but send those over. I think we're gonna rely on COGCC, right, to find, that was kind of the.
I think it's a good starting place, or at least that would be my suggestion, maybe as a starting place to hear from the regulators about their understanding of the industry and you know, to the extent that they could share that, and then their process in terms of permitting. That might bring to light some questions that you guys have, or some areas where you feel like maybe the COGCC's permitting process isn't strict enough. Seems like that would be a good place to start.
Would assume they've got a good contact list too on experts.
I would assume that the COGCC knows just about everybody on both sides of the issue, but not a bad place to get some recommendations.
Great. Sorry, Trustee Butler, I didn't mean to cut you off. I thought there were good questions and comments. I thought it was going to be a comment about the process going forward. That's going to get from the public. So is there anything else from the board? It sounds like there's a sort of direction they're working with the COGCC, coming back with a compilation of other entities that have done stuff the last 1 to 5 years. Trustee Ayers about particulars of Broomfield. Is there anything else? Attorney Foote?
No, I think I have a good idea of maybe some further information that you want. I'm assuming that you just want that presented through memorandum, and then maybe decide at some point when to set the next type of meeting. I guess I'll maybe leave that up to staff to figure out the direction on that. But in the meantime, I'll be in touch with the COGCC as well as do a follow-up memorandum with the answer to some of the questions.
And I'd say instead of 1 to 5 years, maybe say 1 year to when SB 189 was passed.
Is that 2019?
Yeah.
Oh,
1 to 3.
1 to 3 years.
Right. Right. So anything that's happened since SB 181,
Yeah.
or not.
Or-
Like if Johnstown has not revised their regulations, then that should be noted.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
Do you have any questions for us? Sounds like. we're good.
I appreciate the direction, and hope you didn't feel too overwhelmed with all of this. We'll get through it.
It's easy stuff. You kidding?
Well, yeah, and I want to make a comment. I appreciate how you laid this out. When Administrator Cook initially brought this up at our retreat, I was like, wow, that's a long process, but I see why you did it now. And it makes a lot of sense to me to kind of break it down into bite-sized chunks versus throw it at us at one time, and we might make a bad decision, whereas we kind of, this will be a book club for us. We can focus chapter by chapter.
It'll be just like your kids growing up. It'll happen before you know it.
Anything else, trustees?
I just want to say thank you as well. Thank you for breaking it out. It's like, that helps us so much and gives me a lot of peace about moving forward one step at a time together.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Before we move on, do we mind taking a 5-minute break? Is that all right? All right, let's take a 5-minute break. Back at 8:15. Yeah, I'll call the meeting back to order, and we'll move on to our final agenda item tonight of a regular meeting.
David, if I may, before we jump into that agenda item, I just want to be clear. I misspoke prior. The last administrative suspension that this board adopted was in May of this year. It was 180 days or until, how did we write it?
Until it's adopted.
It is 180 days or until the town adopts new oil and gas regulations, whichever is shorter. So if you don't adopt new regulations before 180 days from May 24th, whatever date that is, which I think we can generally say that's not going to happen, we'll just need to extend that suspension again. So I just want to be clear. I misspoke.
Yeah, this is gonna be pretty quick then. We're getting to that 180 pretty quick.
It'll be like November.
It will be. Yeah, it'll be coming up next month or so. So we'll bring back a resolution for you to extend that suspension another time.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right, put my agenda here. And our final item is number 5, to be Botterill. I hope I'm saying that right.
Botterill.
Rezoning. Sorry?
Botterill.
Rezoning. This is a public hearing, so it needs to be a quasi judicial event. The board will be essentially the judge and the jury, and anyone who'd like to speak tonight, that'll be considered public testimony on your experience. And I'll turn it over to our town planner, Adam Olinger. Administrator Kirk, was there anything you wanted to add?
Nope. Sounds good. Thank you.
Excuse me. Good evening, trustees. This is like the mayor introduced, this is a public hearing request for the To Be Botterill Marsh rezoning request. On your screens here, you can see I've outlined the aerial view of the properties in general. It's on the northeast corner of First Street and County Road 8 / Highway 56 / Mountain Avenue, right by the roundabout over there. There's currently a historic home and a historic barn on that property over there. The home was designated about 10 or 15 or so years ago with the Historic Preservation Advisory Committee. The property in question, the eastern property, is currently zoned ag for agriculture. This was done when it was created in 2011. The property to the west of this little red dot or red line there is the house, and that is zoned R1 single family residential. On the preferred land use map from the comprehensive plan from 2021, both these properties are shown to be suburban residential, which allows for the suburban street pattern similar to the subdivision that is surrounding it to the north and east. This is the lot line adjustment that is being processed simultaneously with this rezoning request. So this dashed line here, kind of in the middle left third of your screen, shows where the lot currently exists. That is the house on one property and the barn over here on a separate property. Technically, as the barn is an accessory structure to the house, this should not have been processed, as you cannot have the accessory structure be the primary structure on a property. But nonetheless, it was, and it's existed for the last 11 years this way. However, when the historic home was designated in, I believe it was 2003 or so, 2004, both the home and the barn were designated as historic. The way the municipal code is written for the Historic Preservation Advisory Committee, or the Historic Preservation Code, states that not only the structure, but the entire property is tied to this historic designation. It's because both this house and the barn were included in the designation, they're technically on two properties, both the properties are considered historic per the code. So the applicant, the family that owns both the house and the barn properties, wish to build an additional structure on the far eastern side of the eastern lot, east of the existing barn and everything, an additional single family home. In order to do that, they would need to be able to move that property line from where it's currently separating the house and the barn to moving the line past the barn. So the house and barn are on one property and just vacant land is on the other property. By doing that, they would then not have the historic designation on the eastern property. The historic designation would only apply to the western property. Then that eastern property would exist like 99.9% of other properties. So you can kind of see here the aerial of where that lot line is being moved from. Like I said, this is being processed together with the rezoning request. This is being processed administratively as no density is being created. The two lots already exist. They're just tweaking the line. That is being taken care of administratively. However, on the right-hand side kind of shows where the new lot line would be. Like I mentioned before, the eastern property, the right property, is zoned agricultural currently. Per the municipal code, a property has to be at least 1 acre in size in order to be zoned agricultural. The property is going from just 0.99 acres to 0.41 acres in size. So if staff was to approve this lot line adjustment here, we'd be approving a non-conforming lot, which we would not do. is illegal. So that's why we're here tonight, is so it's in order to approve this lot line adjustment to allow them to build the single family detached residence, we would need to have the board's approval to rezone the property from agriculture to a more appropriate zoning district like R1 single family residential. Staff believes that I know in the past or the last couple of months when we've adopted the new zoning districts, the suburban business, urban residential, everything like that, we've kind of stressed that these need to, all new zoning district or all new zoning applications need to match these districts. We felt that in a one-off like this, it doesn't make sense to have to abide by the suburban business or the suburban residential zoning district standards. And that as it's already adjacent to an R1 property right next door, the historic home and a bunch of technically PUD zone properties in the Peakview Meadow subdivision that all have the characteristics of the R1 residential zoning district. It made the most sense as this case by case situation to just get it as R1. With that, the property to the east, if approved tonight for the rezoning, would have, if a home was to be built on it like is expected, the home would access off of Red Cloud. It would not have any access to Highway 56. So it would face to the north, similar to the houses to the east are. Red Cloud Avenue is a public street. It is all the utility lines underneath are publicly owned and maintained by the town. There is an HOA within Peakview Meadows that these two properties are not and likely will not be a part of, which shouldn't impact the properties at all because the HOA doesn't pay for any of the maintenance to utility lines or road maintenance. That's all in the town. The last slide here is just the official rezoning map, kind of taking that lot 2B on the right from agriculture to single family residential. And of course, this lot line adjustment would only happen if the rezoning was approved tonight. If you chose to deny the rezoning, staff would not approve the lot line adjustment. The lot line would stay in the middle where it exists currently in between the historic home and the barn. With that, I'll turn it over back to you, Mayor, and I'll be here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Trustees, any questions for Planner Ollinger?
Yeah, got it.
Trustee Hardy?
How did you determine where that lot line was to be moved to? Because that new lot looks considerably larger than any of the lots in the subdivision nearby. It looks like it's almost the size of like two lots.
So there's an issue. We made sure that the applicant gave them enough space so that the barn would meet the setbacks required for that property. And also there is a hefty utility easement on the eastern side of the property.
Okay.
So as you can see here, that takes up quite a bit of space. Leaves only really this much space of buildable land.
Okay, so the house isn't going to be built close to the house to the east.
No, it's got
More
quite
to
a
the left
bit
to the
of
left with a big setback.
Correct. The easement.
Because that's going to be my next question was the setback. I was trying to determine between all the lines. Is there just one? Is there three? Because it looks like 2 or 3 lanes there.
Yeah, it's a little, there's a lot of stuff going on there. It's correcting errors flat. So, I mean, these are all these dashed lines on the north and the east sides of the property are all easements. So pretty much anything east of this line that I'm drawing on right now, you can't build on. There's either gas lines or water lines or something.
There's a little bit of curb and dirt path. It looks like the sidewalk was never built and it doesn't look like it's really maintained. That little strip of green lawn along Red Cloud.
Red Cloud. That is correct. There is no sidewalk along Red Cloud in front of these two properties.
So what is that public? What is that?
So that is public right away. The engineering standards would require that they would build the sidewalk along the properties before the building could be CO'd for any additional housing.
It's kind of leading up to my next question. So it's like, who's responsible for maintaining those weeds and putting that sidewalk in there?
If they wanted to build the structure and get the CO, they would need to install the sidewalk and be a part of the CO process for the house. If they sit on the property and don't build the house, then it falls to any future property owner or whenever a house is to get built. As for the weeds and stuff in between, again, that is just like
Who
the
mows
neighbors
that?
to
Who
the
maintains
east.
that? Is that the current owners of
That's the property owner.
Okay, so they've been maintaining that property.
It's just like the tree lawns in front of your house. If you have the grass out there, you're responsible.
So in a sense, they've had street facing property that they've maintained in that neighborhood for the entire time.
Since the road was created.
All right.
actually jump off of that real quick. The sidewalk to the south.
I was gonna go there too.
Yeah. Same rule on that would apply as well, I would assume, or is that different somehow?
We've discussed this a little bit at the staff level. We don't think that, within the CDOT right of way, on what would be the rear of the property, that it would be appropriate to make the property owner build that sidewalk. It's something that we could take on. I'm not really sure why it stopped where it did when it got built in the first place. I mean, I wasn't here when that happened, but there's existing CDOT right of way, so I'm not sure why the sidewalk didn't get extended, but I think it should be, and I think it's something the town can take on.
Kind of fit into that, close the gap sidewalk projects for the town.
Well, okay. So it phrases out a question. Could you do it before the CO is issued? Because I could see that taking 10 years too.
Good. I mean, it's all a matter of priority,
Okay.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so to go back to basics, just help me just visualize this as I'm looking at the map or the aerial view. So the new proposed residence, would it be accessible off of Mount Avenue or Red Cloud?
Red Cloud, no access on the Mountain Avenue.
Okay. So the current historical property there to the west is going to maintain off of Mount Avenue?
That is
like
correct.
it is currently. Yep. And so a new lot is going to be basically added for all intents and purposes within Peakview Meadows.
For all intents and purposes, the lot already exists, but yeah, it'll be a new house, essentially an enclave within Peakview Meadows.
In town enclave.
Yes.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Okay. Not a member of the HOA, but
Not a member of the HOA, but on the corner of the subdivision. Similar to the historic home and then the house to the north.
So
Faces First Street.
in this printed packet that we had, we have some letters from local residences, a couple of which are from the HOA of Peakview Meadows. It's not in our packet that we were given them.
Yeah, I apologize for that.
Yeah, I'm not thrilled about that, to be honest, because now I've got pages of notes here. It's hard to digest. And as I skimmed that, it's coming from some of the board members of that, Peakview Meadows HOA that's suggesting or asking that this be included within the HOA as well, which makes sense since it's, again, for all intents and purposes, it's going to look and feel like it's within the community.
So this was brought up at the planning commission meeting. There weren't any public comments at the planning commission meeting, but the commissioners did bring up these comments. And what we told them at the planning commission meeting is the same thing here, is that you can't force anybody to join your HOA. Property owner could choose to join if they'd like to, or they could choose to stay out of it if they don't like to. The lot's already existing and it's already a lot of record. All the streets, all the utilities, all the infrastructure within the Peakview Meadow subdivision, under Red Cloud, under the connecting streets, Mount Massive, Franklin, all of them are all town owned right away, town owned lines, town owned facilities. So as far as that goes, I think the only real thing that they'd be concerned about would be just their proximity to their neighboring residences.
Okay, I get that. It's a little complicated, to be honest. How about like tree lawns? And I don't want to get buried in the weeds with details, but just to make sure it looks conforming, I guess, within that, neighboring community along Red Cloud there to the north, to get permits and COs, would they also need to apply with all the new ordinances?
They wouldn't need to, but you could make that as a recommendation or as a condition of approval, excuse me.
Okay.
As the lots are already created, lots of record.
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Well, just for the spirit of helping it conform visually as you're driving through Peakview Meadows down Red Cloud, and this is going to be another home, unique home, or lot off of Red Cloud. I think it makes sense to have some conformity with like the tree lawn and having trees planted in that tree lawn consistent with what you see
And a sidewalk put in.
Yeah, I mean, you know, within the context of building a home, we have ordinances that will apply. Our current development code requirements and building code requirements would apply to whatever they do, whatever their new application is. I'm not sure how that would apply to the tree lawn, although I think generally, you know, we would expect that the sidewalk would be extended, you know, in line. We wouldn't allow the sidewalk to be moved back to the curb or anything. It'll create a tree lawn. I guess we'd have to check the ordinances about whether we require that on a single house or if those only apply to subdivisions. My expectation would be that that would apply to every single house that gets built, whether it's a one-off or whether it's 100 houses built in a subdivision.
Right. So that's where my question is at, is if they're not gonna be part of the HOA, which I get that, can't force it. I do think from a town perspective, we should help it conform, so to speak. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly needs to conform to our development codes.
Right. Okay, that's all I have.
Other questions?
Yeah, could the historic homes as well access Red Cloud? Because I know when they came back in at a previous meeting, they discussed possibly doing that. So
We
we
would
could
be
take
open
advantage
to
of
it. We would
trash pickup.
encourage it.
Because right now, I guess I remember something about trash pickup not being able to get in.
We would encourage them being able to access off Red Cloud.
So we're potentially looking at 2 driveways on Red Cloud.
Potentially, yeah. They'd have the legal right to.
Potential, I guess, series of questions, I guess, regarding the lot to the east. So the smaller one that they're wanting to go forward. So essentially, if they wanted to have a driveway or any kind of access, it has to come through Red Cloud is what, hypothetically, is there at all feasible to move it to 56 as an entrance?
CDOT would not allow that.
Is it because it's CDOT's land and they don't want to play nice and you don't
It's too close to the roundabout.
you don't want to have a driveway go up to a state highway? Kind of makes sense. So it's literally Red Cloud or nothing. Likewise, with one car, I don't know if there's studies that have been done, but I mean, say 1 car, 2 cars, hypothetically for this. Any idea about how much additional traffic might be added to Red Cloud or might be endured by the residents of that HOA with having an additional 2 cars?
I would say it would be marginal at best.
I think that, don't quote me on this, but I think the average planning number is like 6 trips a day. I mean, it's meaningless.
Okay. So it's
No reasonable person would notice,
sure.
but the traffic from one additional house.
Okay. Which, that makes sense. And we can't have it go to 56 because that's, obviously you have thousands of people crossing that a day and it's much more dangerous on that front.
And for what it's worth, I think if they came in and applied for a right-of-way permit to add a drive approach off Red Cloud to their existing property today, regardless of whether or not you approve this, we would authorize that under our existing engineering standards. They have a right to access off Red Cloud if they so chose today, and we would, again, just through our regular right-of-way permitting process, would
Sure. And
figure out how to do that.
I guess to reiterate, Red Cloud Avenue and the utilities in the area is maintained by the town, is upheld by the town. We plow it. We take care of the street itself. So even the 6 trips a day hypothetical would be something we would cover the bill for in terms of maintenance.
That is correct. If there's a pothole, if there's a water line issue, we would be the ones who go in and
Sure. Okay.
take care of it.
It's an HOA, not a metro district.
I'm just putting it all out there right now to make sure that there's no.
The metro districts don't maintain the streets and
Either,
the
yeah.
utilities either, so, yeah.
Other questions?
With the exception of one.
Well, it seems like the big question is just approving the removal of one line to the new line. That's our.
What was that?
Just removing the line east. That's
Essentially,
our
The
main,
question is rezoning.
yeah, and rezoning the property. So there's 2 parts.
We in the past have postponed or delayed a hearing in light of getting a presentation. And I can't remember how we did that in the past. Did it go to public comment or did we cut it off beforehand?
I would suggest that if you want.
Yeah, and I'm gonna ask the board after this, but just how we did that. Because I'm bringing this up and the board might disagree with me, but we're having a public hearing and we're really getting any information after Trustee Butler brought this up. We're kind of jogging. We're getting the information right ahead of the meeting. And we had it in the packet, but people's stuff, I can't read that right now.
Well, that's happened before too, where we've gotten letters from the community night of the meeting.
And that's how we started doing that process because we're not feeling like there's adequate time to think things through. But if we want to do that tonight, I just want to bring up how we did that in the past. So I don't, as a chair, don't cross that line.
I Honestly, I think that what you did was that you asked questions, much like you're doing now. And prior to, and then I think you took public testimony. But prior to discussing the issue, you postponed the hearing.
Or table.
And I
Close the
think that
public
Attorney
hearing.
Smith is on the line with us, so maybe she
Yeah.
could weigh in if
Okay.
if I'm
If
missing
the
it.
board
Still
agrees,
close the public hearing, if I remember right.
how do you guys feel about this? Do you feel comfortable voting tonight? I mean,
I do.
okay, you guys feel comfortable? Okay. Well, that's majority, so never mind. Okay, sorry, let's go back. Who did I interrupt? Okay, is that it for questions then? We have the applicant.
The applicant. Briefly, excuse me. The property is going to maintain to the west. So obviously we're talking about, new lot we're going to create accessing to the north and Red Cloud. We've got the current driveway on the western property to the highway essentially, which wouldn't comply with today's new standards. Does it make sense? Is it I think this was brought up, but should that driveway also be moved to Red Cloud to the north to get any access off of the highway?
I think within the previous hearing at the planning commission, that wasn't brought up. I think that that's a discussion that we may need to have either internally or with our engineers prior to approving a lot line amendment, or if you are concerned about that, that may be a condition that you may.
Chris just stated that it's something town staff could approve because it's on a public street. They could approve it.
We could approve it, yeah.
Yeah, I think the question is, can we force them to do it?
Oh,
Not would we approve it? We would approve it and we would recommend that they do it. Our preference is not to have driveways on Mountain Avenue.
I misunderstood the force part.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that
I
part.
think that was the question, right? Trustee Butler?
Yes.
Could we force them?
Could that be a stipulation of this?
Yeah, a condition of this approval. I honestly don't know the answer to that question, but it's certainly something we could talk about. I don't think in the context of the rezoning it matters, but maybe it does. I don't know.
So
Good question. They have an existing.
Do we have Attorney Smith on the line?
No. Okay. Sorry about that.
In the public
I thought we
hearing.
did.
So now I have a question about that. So because the house and the property to the west is historic, would moving the driveway affect the preservation of that historic site?
I think the answer to that is probably no.
I would
The
assume.
driveway is not historic. It was put in when they did the roundabout. I would say they have an existing legal access on Highway 56. And they may not want to give it up. And I'm not, in the context of building a new house, the existing legal access that's already there, it's not hurting anything to approve a new lot and a new home accessing off Red Cloud. It doesn't change the existing situation at all, if I could say it that way.
So this might be our opportunity to fix that.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that it needs to be fixed. I don't know that it's an existing problem for us. It's not something we would permit today, but I wouldn't say that it's a problem.
I don't think we should let the homeowners speak to that because I'm remembering when they were here last and a lot of you weren't here then. So you're asking questions that they think they've already answered at a previous hearing or statement that they'll probably speak to when they come up.
Yeah. It's worth just asking them since they're here.
Sound good? Any other questions? All right, you can speak to the owners, the applicants. If you wish to make a presentation. No.
So the property is basically for.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You might state your name and address, even though
Oh, I'm
talking
sorry.
about your address.
Greg Kylo, it's my wife, Shannon Kylo, and we're at 500 First Street, at the west property, the historic property, and the property out back will be for her father. He's currently living with us in the house, and we want to set him up on his own property out back. So that's the desire to get that in. As far as the driveway, I would prefer to keep access off of 56 if we can. We're used to that. It's easy to get to stuff. We can drive into town, and then going through the back neighborhood makes you kind of loop different directions just to get into town. We'd have to drive up and backtrack into town.
And if I can add, we would have to take down our fence and redo all of our landscaping and everything to
Sprinklers,
make
yeah,
room for
it
a
would be
driveway because we worked around what we had.
That would be kind of going through the really only private lawn we have in the back. We have a kind of a section there with trees, and it's something I would rather
not disrupt if we could.
if possible. And we were gonna have the other property come in off of that way too, but they wanted to have its own access in case the property was ever sold separately, which makes sense.
Yeah.
And because of CDOT's regulations, they had to come in off of Red Cloud. But like I said, he's been living there for a year already, so traffic isn't gonna be a lot different.
Yeah.
But it would be great if we didn't have to redo all of our yard.
I would like to speak to the sidewalk that is on 56. I would love to see that at some point go through. We see kids, it's almost in the summer, like every weekend, we see kids on scooters and bicycles. They don't go through the field because there's, goat heads and it's rough. You can't take a scooter through there. So they go on to incoming traffic into the roundabout. And sometimes people coming off of First just come whipping through there. And I cringe every time I see them go into oncoming traffic and there's cars coming straight on, and I've seen them having to jump and ditch their bike or their scooter into that little right by the B&B there. And I'm just waiting for like, oh my gosh, it's scary. So I would love to see a connected sidewalk so the kids that do come off to the east and come into town have somewhere safe to stay on the sidewalk instead of going into oncoming traffic. So I think it's a matter of time when somebody's going to get hit, and it's just
Since
scary.
you brought that up, there's also a speed limit sign that says 65 right by the roundabout, and everybody thinks they
55,
have
I
for
think.
55.
Yeah.
And everybody thinks that's a minimum, and they punch the gas right there too, which is a
Yeah,
little scary.
there's most people are doing 55, 60 by the time they get to the end of our property. And there's
Yeah, it's loud
all
and
sorts of
dangerous.
kids, that are coming off of that neighborhood. And that'll probably change when that other road goes in for the new development. I'm hoping that'll go down to 35, at least for another so many 100 feet. So that ramps up and not, so that people aren't, I don't know. I agree with her that people think they have to be doing 55 by the time they hit the sign or something. It's crazy how fast people go on that section. But so I don't know if there's anything else we need to.
Yeah, do you guys have any
Answer that.
questions?
Trustee Hardy, looks like
The only comments that I have.
questions.
Oh,
public
comments, still questions.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I was ready for comments. I only have comments. Okay, I think I've got my questions.
We don't
done.
get to.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Oh, actually, left field, but some of the letters. I know the HOA in the area. I don't know what your relationship is with them. I'm sure that actually has nothing to do with the issue at hand. But is it something, would you guys be willing to work together for any kind of areas where that might be necessary?
Are you talking about like in terms of the aesthetic of what the house would look like or something like that?
I'm not necessarily saying you have to sign into the HOA. That's not a decision that we can make for you. It's more just a question of, is it something where, should the HOA need something from you or vice versa, that you guys can at least meet at a table and discuss it as opposed to
Yeah.
essentially a cold shoulder. The entire
For sure. We actually
Sure.
already worked with them on the fence that is on our property, the HOA put in, and it was
Okay.
there before we moved in.
Yeah.
And windstorm blew it down, we fixed it. Windstorm blew it down again, we fixed it again. The third time, we're like, come on, guys, help us out. It's your fence, and then we met in the middle and we worked with them. So that's absolutely doable. We don't have anything against anybody in the HOA.
Yeah, and we would want to do as far as, if there's some kind of a tree, a certain number of trees along the front that are kind of matching the other neighborhood. And obviously the sidewalk, going in
Yeah.
on that side to match what's currently going on. there.
My dad actually went through the neighborhood and was like making notes of, which lawns he wanted and everything for the landscaping. So we're totally willing to work with that.
So you would be reasonable to any kind of accommodations that might be asked of you or vice
Sure.
versa.
If they're reasonable,
Reasonable,
absolutely.
yeah. I'm not,
Right.
I'm just making sure that that table is set up. So if you needed to discuss, that was something you guys are aware of and, okay, sure.
Absolutely.
I do have a question on the fence if they brought it up. So I'm assuming the fence would be removed from the east lot entirely because it would have to conform kind of to like the rest of the front facing houses to the
That's what
street.
we were assuming, but
we thought
we,
that fence line would come and be even
It
with
would
what is there at
match.
the front of the house. We thought we should probably match up with the front of the other houses.
So I was
Yeah.
kind of
basically ask, is that fence going to come around and then make a northern or Southern Run?
So on the north side where we have our fence, it would stop at that line and then come this way.
Okay, so you,
Yeah, kind of like the other house does currently.
Yeah,
Our
just-
fence comes to the corner, so it would be
Picture-
set back the length of that property and then it would kind of go back.
Yeah, picture the existing line just coming in a little bit
Yeah.
and then there would be another house sitting there and then
So
we have
thinking-
this back fence.
that lot, when you put a house on it, should, as you're driving on Red Cloud, I think it should blend and mesh as well as much as possible.
That's what we
Yes.
were hoping to do, is
Yeah.
just kind of make it look kind of the same. The floor plan and the size of it is really similar and, you know, all of that stuff. So
Okay.
we're trying to make it blend in. We're not gonna paint it like purple.
But you could legally.
We could, but we're not gonna.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I'll open the public portion of this hearing up. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to this? Looks like we have 0 signed up. Anyone in person that didn't get a chance to sign up would like to speak to this? Anyone online, clear? Okay, I'll close that, bring it back to the board for deliberation and a vote. Trustee Hardy, well, we'll start with you.
Yes, my comments. I would say my comment or stipulations that we put on this whole thing is that the town work with CDOT on making a safer passage from the neighborhood sidewalk to the CDOT sidewalk and somehow get that all connected together so that the kids don't have to go out on the road, creating a more safe environment there. And then I think the homeowners would be responsible for maintaining the tree lawn area from the far east property to the west property on the curve, maintaining the fence and the tree lawn area, planting trees and finishing that sidewalk to make it more cohesive with the rest of the neighborhood as their end of the deal to make all this package work. And I think ultimately putting in those sidewalks and aesthetically making the whole property a little more pleasing would be beneficial to the whole community and it'd make it safer. I know there are some safety concerns brought up about adding more house, but I think in reality, building that house there is going to create a safer neighborhood because we're completing these pathways for the. So I think that'd be a good compromise for both sides.
I'm just trying to write these down. Let's start there. Does everyone feel good about those or have any other thoughts on that?
Let's close the gap.
Okay, well, let's go around the board. Trustee Murphy, how do you feel about this?
I'd agree with Trustee Hardy's comments, and I agree it is a priority to close that gap on 56 if possible, as soon as possible. But I have no additional comments.
Okay.
As well said.
Trustee Sarcelli?
I agree about the sidewalk being completed and I appreciate the homeowners' willingness to try and make the property fit in with the adjoining properties. However, I think that's their decision. So I don't want to stipulate it, but I do appreciate their willingness. And I think that we can move forward.
Trustee Ayers?
No, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think also finishing that sidewalk and possibly the addition of another house there may actually help with the acceleration problem because it looks like a continuous neighborhood instead of an agricultural site. So it seems like it might be connected more. And I would also thank the homeowners for doing the most that they possibly can to kind of integrate the property into the existing community. But my concern would be infrastructure. So sidewalk and street view. I'm not really concerned as much about the look of whatever house they may or may not decide to put on the property because I think that's kind of it's their land. So, and they're not part of the HOA. And I understand the need to kind of to integrate, but I think that's, like I said, more of an infrastructure issue for me to make sure that the sidewalk looks the same, the driveway looks the same. But as far as architecture, as long as it's not, as long as it's conforming with town code, I wouldn't really consider that an issue.
Okay. Trustee Butler?
Concur with all the points made. One additional comment, I do want to thank the applicant. Now I've been a little critical of some comments, but I really do appreciate working with the historical landmark designations and kind of putting this back together like it probably should be. I think it is going to look and feel and function much better. So I just want to say that. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Echo all the other comments, nothing new to add. Do this thing.
All right, likewise, and like Trustee Butler said, thank you, and this is kind of a unique property. And the boundary line, take a thumbs up too. I think that approved. Anyway, yeah, thank you, and I can understand the residents in that community being a little upset about this, but it sounds like you guys are on the right track, want to work with them, and I think this really will be better for the pedestrians too, so.
Well, and if you look at the graphic, it looks like a thumbs
So like a Facebook thumbs up there. So yeah, I think in the long run, this could be better for everyone to get that filled in. Is there anything else? Trustee Hardy, would you like to make that motion?
Sure. Let's see here. Okay, I move to adopt and approve ordinance 1309, amending the zoning map of the town of Berthoud to rezone a portion of the property previously known as the Botterill Marsh property from did I do the right one first? Yeah. From agricultural to single family residential district. And then do I put in the stipulations of completing the sidewalk and tree line?
Add the conditions there, yep.
And put the conditions that the sidewalk on the north be completed by the property owner and maintains the tree line to aesthetically match the rest of the neighborhood. And that the city of Berthoud would work with CDOT on completing the sidewalk on the south side. So Highway 56.
Okay, Trustee Hardy has moved on this. Trustee Murphy has seconded it. Is there anything else? Any final discussion? All right, at this point, I'll just bring up real quick. I don't want to be a downer, but staff, we can't do this day of anymore. And I know this might have been an accident, and we have to have legal representation during a public hearing.
Yep.
That's it. Is there anything else? Quick, we have a roll call vote.
Mayor Pro Tem Grace.
Yes.
Trustee Hardy.
Yes.
Trustee Ayers.
Yes.
Trustee Murphy.
Yes.
Trustee Sarcelli.
Yes.
Trustee Butler.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Congratulations. Let's move on to reports. From there, we'll go into an executive session. Administrator Kirk, we won't be making any decisions, or we won't need to come out to the public afterwards, right? We can adjourn for that. Okay, so we'll do reports next, and we'll start off with Trustee Hardy.
The interviews went great, as you all saw tonight. Is there anything else? I don't think I have anything else.
Okay.
I don't think I have anything else. Looking forward to working with new community members on the HVAC.
Yeah, that is Trustee Murphy.
Nothing in general. Regarding the tree committee, we had some serious discussions about enforcement, along with other avenues of notifying staff on how to actually monitor the implementation of trees throughout developments and throughout the town. So we'll continue talking about that, looking for solutions, but other than that, I have nothing else.
Okay, thanks. Trustee Sarcelli.
Just a couple of things. I'm grateful for I forget Leslie. It was Leslie who said it when she talked about downtown, and I was just reminded of we brought up having string lights at some point downtown just to make it feel more lively at night or more lit up. Obviously conforming to our dark sky, but I don't know if there's anything we could do to discuss having. I know we can't go across CDOT's road, but maybe we can go along the sidewalk ways and go that way. I don't know if that's possible, if we could even, if that's even something that interests you guys, but I do think bringing more life and vibrancy to the downtown is important for business and making it look alive and safe and vibrant. So I just want to bring that up. If anybody else.
No, I agree. I think Fort Collins is great when they do that. I'm sure others too. I mean, we already have a budget for Christmas lighting, right? Decorative lighting. Could we look into the cost of what that would to add more lighting?
We, CDOT said we couldn't do it across the road, but I don't know about along the road, so we can look into that.
Yeah,
Do the trees at least.
Yeah.
I was gonna add the trees, yeah. That's what's so beautiful
That's what
about.
Fort Collins does.
Yeah.
They fill those trees with lights.
Lights would be lovely.
Downtown Wilton too.
And then, thank you for, bringing that to us. And then the other thing is, I have been kind of inundated with all the business owners in the community. Their biggest concern is the 4-day work week at Town Hall. I've had real estate agents, contractors, just people that I work with on a daily basis or that I know or have connections with. They talk about the money loss that they're having because Fridays are closed. So if they have a project they need, there's 3-day lag, and then Monday's catch-up day. And so there's usually even more lag on anything that they need to get approved in order to move a project along. So they'll either lose clients, or it could possibly affect a real estate deal or things like that. Like I've heard it from so many different people all at once that I can't ignore it anymore. And so I just want to bring that to the board to discuss. And then maybe that's something we need to do a little bit more research and talk to more business owners about how it's impacting their business, not being able to work with town staff 1 day a week.
I don't want to hog the conversation. I agree. And I've heard it from a contractor too. Mike and I were having lunch one day and we got an earful from him. He couldn't approve something. And then from a retail owner too, that's really angry about it. And I know it is a great perk. It's a great incentive for the employees. Maybe there's some hybrid there we can have where.
I think we can reopen town hall 5 days a week and still maintain a 4-day work week for some of the staff. I don't know if that's an issue. For what it's worth, I haven't gotten any complaints, so I appreciate you guys bringing that feedback back to me. Our parks public works staff all work on Fridays. I'm not aware that we're not meeting timelines for anything. There are lots of times when people come in and say, I needed something on Friday and you weren't here, but it's not something we would have processed in 1 day anyway.
Right. To be fair, some of this is I'm frustrated. It's Friday and I'm going to take it out on my government.
Yeah, sure. And we get it too. And so, that's definitely something we can talk about. I don't know if the board wants us to reopen on 5 days, we just need to figure out how to make that work. I don't know that we really have a strong preference one way or the other.
I see a conversation
from
there.
my perspective. I just haven't heard any complaints about it. So otherwise I would have brought it to you before, but
and it's little things too, like the hunter issue on Friday, and I do kind of get the calls on Friday, like the hunter issue that they just, they don't know who to contact and they see my number. So
yeah. I mean, we have an after hours number and that diverts to whoever's on call to deal with, kind of random issues that come up like that.
Yeah. But you were able to address that. There was someone, it was Keith, and he seemed to be there pretty quick.
His crew was all working on.
So they were there.
Again, our public works park staff are available 5 days a week anyway. And our inspection crews are out 5 days a week.
So do they have an administrative staff?
So it's just administrative staff and permitting.
I don't know.
Permitting desk.
Well, do we want to make that a discussion item?
I do appreciate why it's in place, that you're caring for your staff, and I think the staff works really hard, but I do think with as much business is moving in Berthoud, we want to keep that continuum, and we also want to support our business owners that a lot of them are really struggling. We want to make sure that they can access people they need in a timely manner. And I know you are doing a great job.
Sure.
So don't think I'm saying that you're not.
Yeah, no,
But
unfortunately,
I am getting a lot of feedback as though, why can I not get a hold of anybody else? So they're going to call whoever they can get a hold of, which is frustrating.
You said maybe there's a staggered approach. Like I did that at City of Boulder.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I think the town hall hours are not reflective of staff scheduling. The reason we went to 4-day work weeks was during COVID. We closed on Fridays because it was too hard to stagger. As you may or may not remember, we were required to have only half of our staff in the office at a time. And the easiest way to do that was to just close on Fridays and only be there, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, Thursday. And so we could split everybody into 5 days. It was just to rotate through, like sometimes you're here 3 days a week and sometimes you're here 2 days a week. It was just kind of a hassle. And during COVID, no one came in anyway for like a year and a half. And so that's just continued, again, largely because we haven't heard any feedback otherwise. So it's good to hear that today, and we can work all those details out.
I've heard that too.
Yeah.
I've gotten that feedback.
That work for you, Christopher Sully? I'm sorry. You heard the same thing?
Yeah, I've got the same feedback from.
Yeah, and again, it's not an employee scheduling issue. So.
Cool. All right. Well, I guess we'll have that conversation, or you're just going to come back with the option, or?
Well, it sounds like, unless you want to have that conversation, it sounds like the board's sort of going back to being open 5 days a week.
Yeah, I feel bad for employees without having input, but I guess that's their.
Yeah, I'm sensitive to it.
Employees don't have to put on lots of things.
So can you stagger it though? Because that's what I did at the City of Boulder. 1 week I had 5.
We'll deal with scheduling. I think that's no issue.
So they'll still have a
You
4-day
may still
work.
have the opportunity to do a variety of alternative work week schedules. And they're highly valuable from a recruitment and retention standpoint for what it's worth. We've had employees who have turned down other jobs because they like their 4-day work week. And we've had employees take jobs here because we were willing to offer one.
Yeah, and
So they're valuable, but
that's why we want to have I don't want you
only
to,
a small portion of our staff works a 4-day work week. So a lot of folks work 5 days a week as their regular schedule. So it's just an alternative work week that we offer. It's not why we do 4 days a week at town hall.
okay, gotcha, okay. Does that work?
I mean, I guess my thought on it is in terms of leadership style, like these are the complaints or issues. And then however you wanted to figure that out for staff, I guess was the ask. It's not all right, everybody's back. It's 9 to 5.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, I don't know exactly what the complaints are related to. If it's like, hey, I couldn't get a hold of somebody and there's a limb down in the street.
That could be more than that.
We do have a number for that. We do have staff on call to deal with those issues. So we just need to make sure that people know how to do that. If it's, hey, I wanted to get a permit processed on Friday and you weren't there, if that's the only day you could submit your permit, or that's the only day you want to do your passport application or whatever, I could see that being a challenge for folks. It doesn't mean that we would necessarily process it that day, right? Like, we don't issue permits in one day. But in any case,
Okay.
yeah, certainly there are reasons why it would be great to be open 5 days a week.
And for reference, a lot of the people I've talked to, they're contractors who need to work on an emergency situation or like plumbing, something over the weekend. And it's an additional day that they can't get through, or real estate agents that are trying to get, or developers are trying to, I don't know, all of the mechanics, but it's
Yeah.
been, yeah.
And that's the ones that were vocal with the explanation. The one on Main Street didn't really have one, but the one was a contractor that he couldn't get work done over the weekend because he needed some kind of permission. Talk to Mike and I.
Yeah.
I guess this was the what and the how is up to you, and hopefully we can be as flexible.
We'll figure it out and we'll come back to you with the plan.
Right, yeah.
Thank you.
And I understand it is a great perk. A lot of my loyalty when I worked for the city of Boulder was having a 4 week. So I understand how that could be a really good recruitment and retention strategy.
Yeah, very much so.
Thank you for being flexible. Trustee Ayers.
Yeah, so I guess I apologize for being late. I was late because we were doing
Can't apologize. for your work.
security training for the school. The sheriff's department came in and kind of oversaw everything. And so I just wanted to kind of take this moment to thank our first responders who are in the room, Chief Anderson specifically, for being here every day. It's always kind of one of the worst conversations that we have in our school every year. It's never good, but thank you guys for kind of giving us the leadership through that kind of thing for teachers. That really helps us to know that we have the support from you guys. So thank you. Sorry, I just needed to.
No, don't be sorry. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And you're never required to do it. So I appreciate you, you're taking up your time to do it. Especially tonight, we have fire representation too. So you're all coming.
Chiefs.
Trustee Butler.
I already brought this up, but just to reinforce, I'm all about Christmas lights downtown. To Linda Wilson's, comments about trees. And I know that Trustee Murphy is working with that committee and liaison position, but I'd like to see a little bit more enforcement, I guess, behind or involvement from whoever can do that on staff or inspection, teams. Because I know how the landscapers work, and they just tree shows up, they plant it as fast as possible and move on. And I realize we have our 1-year warranty process, which is helping, but there's still some gaps to plug, I think, with just improving it. So I would like to see that just get kind of resolved. Because we are the tree city designation. So I think that does echo with me personally. Last comment is Oktoberfest this Saturday. Excited.
Point. Mayor Pro Tem.
Only two things. Youth advisory, being seniors, they're starting to get some more scheduling conflicts. So they are moving their meeting days temporarily to Tuesdays, alternating from board meetings. Oktoberfest this Saturday is at Fickle Park at 11, I believe. And that's it.
All right.
I'm gonna be there.
Yeah, this Saturday.
Yeah, this Saturday.
Yeah, okay.
The very one.
Yes. All right. I'll be there. I just want to, my only thing was the trees too. That was really disappointing to hear, that we can't. So we look forward to finding any workarounds, that legally make this possible. Right after I heard, you said that Administrator Kirk, which I don't doubt this information is accurate, but it's just how would a really low quality slimy landscaper do it? You plant it in April, know that you only have to maintain it 4 months till the leaves fall off, and then you're good through winter, never come back to it. And yeah, that makes things for the board hard.
For what it's worth, they don't maintain them at all.
Well, if they have a year warranty, then they need to, right? We could call them out anytime.
They, I think generally take the risk that the homeowners are taking care of the trees, the Metro District's watering and maintaining the landscaping, and then if some die, then they'll just deal with it. But they don't, they're not out kind of hand watering trees or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
They don't do inspections.
I guess I keep thinking more of so it's one particular development on Berkeley Parkway. That
Yeah,
is
no,
just
they
over-
cut down like 100 trees.
Yeah. And so that when we see homeowners aren't going to get it. That's their HOA or their Metro that's supposed to be on top of the developers. There's just a lot of things to figure out. And as a trustee, I feel like that's just nothing but incentive to pass something that they have no opportunity or no obligation to maintain. So it's just kind of like,
Again, I
to
think
look
that's
at.
part of the reason why it's important that we do proper inspections prior to install and during install, which I think we're doing now.
yeah.
Much better than we were in the past, certainly.
Well, I think requiring a Metro District landscaping budget and all this stuff. So when we do come back to them, they're not like heartbroken that there's 100 trees that they have to figure out what to do with. They
Yeah.
have money to do it.
And I do think,
Well,
yeah, it's a bigger conversation.
Yeah, so-
We've talked, for what it's worth, I mean, our staff's met about it several times over the last 6 months.
I'd love to have a conversation. I agree with you.
Including, legal review and all kinds of stuff. So we
Yeah.
can have a lot bigger conversation with the board if you guys want.
I think we need to, and I'd like to I think it's kind of pressing. I mean, I don't, how much longer we want to
You
go.
guys can set some time aside in the agenda. I think it's a worthy topic for.
I'd love to do it
serious
this year.
discussion.
I have a
Enforce it, the
problem
harder it's
approving
gonna be to
another big,
enforce it.
knowing this, that they can kind of just abandon it after a year. Or less.
Metro District is not abandoning, Metro District's responsible to maintain those trees. If they choose not to,
Then that's how we need to get
it's
into
not
it.
like, that's not like you chose not to maintain the trees in your yard.
Yeah, well, no, on,
Force you to replace them. And the tree lawn is the one place where it might be a unique issue. And I think there's some legal concerns there. We just need to talk through with you guys.
exactly. And I hate to do this again where we have a ham and it's just like, there's nothing we can do now, but take a bunch of volunteers, build it. If we ever want this back, this is going to be on the tree board to manually plant these ourselves because there's no one we can hold accountable, or we just have grass for time going forward. Anyway, yeah, I'd love to have a conversation.
Yeah, I hear you completely.
Okay. And that's it for me. Anything else, trustees, before we move into executive sessions?
A staff report.
Yes, that would be great. Sorry, Chris.
Okay, nothing for me.
No, it's okay. Anyone like to move into executive session?
Move to enter into executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 246402, subpart 4EI, to determine positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing a strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators. And the following details are provided: possible sale of Old Town Hall.
I'll second it.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem Grace has moved on this. Trustee Hardy has seconded. Any final discussion on this motion? Quick, we have a roll call vote, please.
Trustee Ballmer,
Yes.
trustee Harris,
Yes.
trustee Hardy,
Yes.
trustee Scarcella,
Yes.
trustee Murphy,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Gray,
Yes.
Mayor Martin.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, everyone who's been attending. I'll take a 5-minute break. Try